Chapter 176. He's an esteemed guest. All of you, behave yourselves. Don't interrupt as you please. Sensing the changes in her subordinates' emotions, Jian Ying's expression turned cold, causing her subordinates to become much more obedient. Ha ha ha, Commander Xiao, it's an honor to meet you. After reminding her subordinates to behave, Jian Ying saw that Xiao Feng had already reached the second floor and was standing in front of her. She immediately laughed heartily. Xiao Feng noticed Jian Ying's enthusiasm, but he didn't show any reaction. Instead, he nodded and arrogantly sat down on a chair in front of the table. He crossed his legs and casually scanned the surroundings. This restaurant's decor is too old-fashioned. It's too old-fashioned. What he meant was that the place Jian Ying had chosen to meet him was a little too shabby. In response, Jian Ying could only smile and say, I originally wanted to invite Commander Xiao to a banquet in the Immortal abode, but after considering that it's the loyal Marquis territory, I'm afraid it'll be inconvenient. What's so inconvenient about it? We're mercenaries. We're only doing this because we took the loyal Marquis money. Xiao Feng raised his head, as if he didn't care about Yang Chendong at all. It seemed like Xiao Feng didn't put anyone in his eyes, but when he said these words, his little heart was thumping. He thought in his heart, young master, you taught me to do all of this. It's not that I don't respect you. How could Jian Ying know this? After probing a little, she discovered that Xiao Feng and Yang Chendong were only mercenaries. She was overjoyed. As expected, mercenaries only recognized money and not people. In that case, if others could hire them, wouldn't it be the same if they had money too? As she rejoiced in this information, Jian Ying leaned forward and asked in a small voice, then if our emperor is willing to pay money to hire you, would you be willing to work for him? Why not? Xiao Feng stared at Jian Ying, as if this was a matter of course and there was no doubt about it. Jian Ying didn't expect to get the answer so quickly. She was overjoyed and sighed that this task wasn't difficult. She opened her mouth and said, if that's the case, how much did the loyal Marquis spend to hire you? Our emperor is willing to pay the same price, no. I'll give you an extra 10%. Oh? Your emperor is willing to invite us? But what are you doing? Xiao Feng pretended to be interested and asked. It's nothing. We just hope that you can defeat the Walla's army that threatens the safety of the capital. Our emperor has also said that once you succeed, he will give you more silver. Jian Ying was afraid that Xiao Feng would be afraid of war, so she purposely emphasized on giving them more money. Tiger's Mane had previously spoken to Xiao Feng on behalf of Yang Chendong about what would happen if he met Jian Ying. He wasn't surprised at all that Jian Ying had said. Thus, when he heard this, he said as they had discussed, Eunuch Jian, I'm very sorry, but this isn't a problem with the money. Jian Ying, who had been prepared to talk incessantly and even wondered if she could get some more money from the commission for her own use, was immediately struck dumb by Xiao Feng's answer. She didn't understand. Just now, they had said that they could be hired with money, so why couldn't they do it now? Seeing the confusion on Jian Ying's large face, Xiao Feng shook his head and seriously said, Eunuch Jian presumably knows that I am only a company commander and belong to a branch of the mercenary army. There are officers above me, so I can only report your request to the higher-ups. As for whether they will accept or not, that will depend on the higher-ups. What? You mean that your position doesn't allow you to make the decision on this matter? Jian Ying had thought that Xiao Feng was the head of the mercenary army, but to her surprise, he didn't even have the authority to make the decision. That's right, I truly don't have the authority to make the decision. Of course, if your emperor is willing, you can report the price first. I will immediately report the situation. I think it won't take long before we get a reply. Xiao Feng nodded and said in a businesslike tone. Upon hearing that he still had to report the matter, Jian Ying considered the current situation in the capital and realized that he probably didn't have much time to prepare. Thus, he anxiously asked, then how long will it take for you to report the matter? That will depend on luck. If everything goes smoothly, it should be about a month or two. Xiao Feng pretended to be thinking very seriously, and after thinking for a while, he very cautiously replied. Yang Chendong had naturally thought of this answer so that Jining wouldn't have any other ideas. Reality proved that when Jining heard this answer, he immediately became listless. Only now did he realize that what Xiao Feng had said wasn't a problem with the money, but rather how to interpret it. This was Yang Chendong's method of giving people hope and then giving them disappointment. In order to prevent others from thinking that these mercenaries were directly related to him, he couldn't refuse Jin Ying's request, but he also couldn't fulfill his wish. In this way, the delaying technique could be put to good use. Jining left in disappointment, not even offering a price. He probably also knew that if he waited for Xiao Feng to report the matter, who knew how long he would have to wait. At that time, whether or not the capital even existed would be up in the air. Trying to change the situation would be pointless. Upon returning to the imperial palace, Jining truthfully reported his meeting with Xiao Feng to Zhu Qiyu. At this time, Zhu Qiyu had already awoken from his rage at Yang Chendong's request, or perhaps it could be said that he was no longer so angry. When he heard Jin Ying's report, he let out a long sigh and said, "So, we can only agree to the loyal marquis request?" "I'm afraid that's the only thing we can do," Jining weakly replied. The emperor trusted him so much, but if he couldn't even handle such a small matter, he truly felt that he had no face left. "Beloved official, what do you think of this matter? If I agree to the loyal marquis request and allow him to set up a private bank, what kind of adverse effect will it have on us?" Knowing that there was no other choice, Zhu Qiyu began to face the problem of the Yang clan's bank. Jining had already begun to consider this matter on the way back from the restaurant. Since the mercenary route was not feasible, they could only face Yang Chendong. The matter of the bank had to be placed before them. Hearing Zhu Qijuan's question, Jining hesitated for a moment, and then a vicious light flashed through his eyes as he said, "Your Majesty, this might not be a bad thing. You can agree to let him set up a Yang clan bank. As long as Walla retreats, won't your Majesty have the final say in your territory? What if the loyal marquis is not here one day? Don't you think that the money in the bank will be confiscated? If that's the case, everything the loyal marquis is doing now is just making a wedding dress for Zhen." "Beloved official, is this what you mean?" Zhu Qiyu originally had this idea, but he was the emperor. This kind of matter of getting rid of the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness was not good, so as to avoid other people's gossip. However, Jining was completely different. He was just a eunuch. For someone who wasn't complete, it was normal for him to do anything. "Your Majesty is wise." Jining saw that Zhu Qiyu understood what he meant and immediately knelt on the ground and exclaimed, "Huh, good, good." The problem was solved so easily. Zhu Qiyu couldn't help but be in a good mood. If that's the case, what's the harm in agreeing to his request? Not only that, we should also create momentum for him. How about this, when the Yang family bank is established, the imperial palace will also deposit some silver into it. Presumably, with this emperor taking the lead, there will definitely be many people depositing silver, and the amount won't be small, right? "Yes, your Majesty is wise. When the Yang clan bank is set up, it will be a fat pig. Once it's fattened up, your Majesty can slaughter it at any time and use it for your own purposes." Jining also chuckled at the side. At this moment, the two officials had malicious smiles on their faces. If Yang Chendong saw this, he would definitely be overjoyed. In the Yang clan manner. Xiao Feng had already rushed back and reported the first sentence he said to Jining from the beginning to the end of their meeting. If Jining was present at this moment, she would definitely be very surprised. Company Commander Xiao Feng, who had said that he didn't care about the loyal marquis, was now so respectful and careful when he saw Yang Chendong. "You've done well. Go and have a good rest." Yang Chendong, who was very satisfied with Xiao Feng's performance, smiled and watched him leave. He knew that after this meeting, even if Zhu Qiyu didn't agree, he would have to agree. In this way, the Yang clan bank would be recognized by the imperial family, and its development would be just around the corner. Of course, with Yang Chendong's intelligence, it was impossible that he hadn't thought of Zhu Qiyu's revenge. However, killing him was undoubtedly a fool's dream. He would let the other party be happy for a while. When the Yang clan bank really became strong, it would be too late for regrets. Tiger's Mane, immediately send a message to Gao Xiong in Qiqian City. Have him transport all the gold stored in the city and plundered from the sea to the capital. I have great use for it. Yang Chendong gave the order after some thought. The matter of the Yang clan bank would soon be resolved. In comparison, this was a profitable business. With money, he would have a foundation for development. With money, he could do many things that he wanted to do. At that moment, he hummed a little tune as he walked towards the rear courtyard. There were 4 outstanding beauties waiting for him there, waiting for him to appear. Chapter 177. In the main hall of the Imperial Palace, the officials had gathered early in the morning for a meeting. There was only one topic for this so-called meeting: who should lead the army to battle Walla. In yesterday's imperial court, Vice Minister Su Yozhen of Taichung Temple had recommended that Marquis of Loyalty Yang Chendong lead the army. Zhu Qiyu had not agreed on the spot and had instead given the officials 1 day. Early this morning, this topic had become the first matter to be resolved. Last night, another report had come from the front lines. Commander and Commander-in-Chief Wuxia Count Shiheng had led a defeated army of less than 30,000 retreating toward Datong. There was nothing in front of Walla's army to block their path, and they were able to pass through Jianghu Pass and head straight for the capital. This meant that the enemy would arrive at the capital in 7 days at the slowest and 4 at the fastest. If the capital was still unprepared, it would be broken through and everyone would be captured or killed. With the situation so grim, a candidate had to be chosen. Jining announced the news she had received last night in front of all the officials. There were those in the imperial court who were terrified, uneasy, and pale. Civil officials used their mouths while military officials used their sabers. In times of peace, etiquette came first and reason was paramount. This naturally created a situation in which civil officials suppressed military force. But in an emergency situation, reason naturally did not make sense. Trying to reason with the enemy was tantamount to telling a tiger in the mountains to switch to a vegetarian diet. How laughable was that? It was no different from walking into the tiger's den. When they saw that the war was unavoidable, the civil officials naturally shut their mouths. On the contrary, they even revealed expressions of fear. They were completely different people compared to how they were in the past, talking about the past and discussing the present. Who wouldn't be afraid of death? After repeated defeats, Walla's army had placed an enormous pressure on the officials. One could truly say that they paled at the mere mention of it. In this situation, now that there was a candidate to recommend, the officials naturally did not hold back on their praise. Minister of War Yi Ming proposed that Marquis of Loyalty Yang Chendong lead the army. This new minister was truly rather afraid that if there was no suitable candidate, Dai Zong would have him lead the army into battle. If that happened, what difference would it be from sending him to his death? With the Minister of War taking the lead, the other officials naturally agreed. At this moment, they were treating a dead horse as if it were still alive. And it wasn't just the officials. Even Hu Xiao and Hu Changning, who had opposed the idea yesterday, were now among the officials who supported it. Not only did they support Yang Chendong leading the army, they also requested that he be given great authority. They also said that if the army could not be unified, countless variables could appear on the battlefield. Obviously, when they returned to the Hu estate yesterday, Yang Chendong's words could be considered to have convinced the Hu father and son, which was why they had such a change today. The crowd of courtiers almost unanimously supported Yang Chendong. Sitting high on the dragon throne, Zhu Qiyu knew that the general trend could not be changed. At the imperial court, he ordered people to go forward and pass on the imperial decree for Yang Qindong to attend the imperial court. At this moment, the newly ascended emperor had clearly made up his mind. In the Yang clan manner, Yang Qindong wore a black gauze hat and a turtleneck shirt. There was a python pattern on the chest patch and a belt around his waist. He looked like a third-rank official as he sat in the main hall. Beside him, Hu Yan, Xiao Yin, Lady Shui, Lady Xiang, and Yang Duo were pointing and laughing. From time to time, they would cover their mouths with their hands and chuckle. Clearly, this was the first time they had seen the sanctimonious Yang Qindong. Is there something wrong with that? Seeing that the five women's eyes were so curious and changing, Yang Qindong finally couldn't help but ask if there was a problem. No, it's very good. I used to see grandfather and father dressed like this when they went to court. I just didn't expect Sixth Lang to have such a day, so I'm very curious. Hu Yan covered her mouth and chuckled while shaking her head. She wanted to pretend to be serious, but no matter how she looked at it, she could not hide the smile on her face. There was really nothing wrong with Yang Qindong's clothes. If there was anything to blame, it could only be blamed on his young age. He was not even 20 years old, yet he was dressed so formally. It gave the girls a feeling that he was too dignified and ridiculous. Is there really no problem? Yang Qindong asked with some disbelief. He glanced at the women one by one. Apparently, he did not believe Hu Yan's words just now. There's really no problem. Seeing the disbelief on Yang Qindong's face, seventh sister Yang Duo stood up. It's just because you rarely wear court attire, so everyone is not used to it. Yes, I'm also not used to it. Forget it, I won't wear it. Come, take it off for the young master. Yang Qindong also felt uncomfortable after wearing these clothes, so he simply decided to stay away from them. As he spoke, he really took off the court attire. Xiao Yin stepped forward to help and asked with doubt, Sixth Lang, do you really want to take it off? Didn't you say that the emperor would send an edict to invite you to enter the palace in a while? There's nothing wrong with entering the palace, but who stipulated that I have to wear court attire to enter the palace? It's so awkward, so it's better not to wear it. Yang Qindong smiled and shook his head. In his heart, he was thinking, I don't have the intention to be an official of the great Ming dynasty, so why do I have to abide by their rules? Besides, if I can't even make this decision and have this little freedom, then I'll be too pitiful. After taking off the court attire and changing into a new set of green clothes, Yang Qindong felt incomparably comfortable. He couldn't help but laugh. That's right. Nothing is more important than being yourself. You should also remember, unless it's an important occasion, you can wear whatever you want. Wear whatever is comfortable. Life is only a few decades, so don't be too hard on yourself. Just as he changed into a new set of green clothes, a eunuch came to pass on a message from outside the Yang family manor, asking the loyal marquis to immediately enter the palace. The emperor and all the civil and military officials were waiting for him. Tiger's Mane had already prepared a healthy horse. Yang Qindong nimbly flipped onto the horse and waved at the women behind him. Then, under the protection of Tiger's Mane and Xiao Vi, the first guard, he went straight to the capital. Hu Yan watched her husband leave. When she couldn't see his shadow anymore, she put on the appearance of a big sister. She turned around to look at Xiao Yin and the other two girls and said, Lu Lang has left. According to his instructions last night, we must immediately take action. Second sister Xiao Yin will stay in the Yang family manor to take care of the overall situation. Third sister Lady Shui and fourth sister Lady Xiang will go to the capital. As long as there are cheap properties and fields, buy them and register them. We'll listen to big sister's instructions. Xiao Yin, Xiao Yushue, and Dong Hanxiang hurriedly agreed. Yang Duo and her daughter were left behind. Seeing everyone start to get busy, their faces were filled with envy. At this time, her thoughts were also changing. In her eyes, women were no longer just women who knew how to take care of their husbands and children. They could actually do many things. In the imperial court, the officials had been standing here for a long time. Some of the more impatient officials even looked out of the hall more than once, as if they were waiting for something. Amidst the anticipation of the officials, a eunuch's typical Drake-like voice rang out. The loyal Marquis requests an audience. He's here, he's here. When the officials heard the shout, they hurriedly straightened their clothes and stood in place. Even Zhu Qiyu, who was sitting on the dragon throne, subconsciously straightened his dragon robe and looked outside the hall with bright eyes. Amidst everyone's anticipation, the azure-robed Yang Chendong strode into the throne room. The last time he came to the throne room, it was the second day after he entered the capital. He had beaten Wang Go and received the treatment of beating the drum. Compared to before, this time, he was less nervous and uneasy. The imperial court had long ago decreed that when entering the hall to meet the emperor, one had to wear the corresponding official robes. But at this time, Yang Chendong was dressed in azure-robed and entered the imperial court, yet no one said anything. Even the censors, who loved to nitpick, acted as if they did not see him. Subject Yang Chendong pays respects to your majesty. My majesty is. Yang Chendong entered the hall and knelt when he was some steps away from the throne. After allowing Yang Chendong to kneel in front of him, Zhu Qiyu raised his hand and said, "All right, loyal Marquis, stand up and speak." "Thank you, your majesty." Even though he did not like kneeling, in front of the officials, in the imperial court, there were some etiquette that could not be discarded. After answering, Yang Chendong slowly stood up. When he stood up, he stood there like a javelin, giving off the feeling that no matter what wind blew, he would not move. Standing among the officials was Hu Zhangning. He had been practicing martial arts since he was a child and had some skill. At this moment, when he saw Yang Chendong's performance, he could not help but have a thought in his mind. His son-in-law seemed to be a martial artist, and his strength should not be weak. But why did he not notice it before? Yang Chendong stood where he was. Zhu Qiyu, who did not understand martial arts, naturally could not see Yang Chendong's true strength. His intuition told him that the loyal Marquis was standing there with great vigor. "Loyal Marquis, we have summoned you to this hall to discuss matters. I presume that you also know what is going on. Walla's army is threatening the capital, and the officials have recommended you to lead the army. We also believe in loyal Marquis, but are you willing to do your duty for the country?" Even though he had already sent Jining to privately discuss this matter with Yang Chendong, he still had to do his duty. At this moment, he still had to go through the proper procedures. This subject is willing to do his duty for the country, share His Majesty's burden, and do his best for the peace and prosperity of the Great Ming. Anyone could say beautiful words, and at this moment, Yang Chendong had put on a perfect display of the relationship between ruler and subject. Good. Zhu Qiyu was elated to see Yang Chendong so readily agree. "Loyal Marquis, hear this. You are made General of Swift Cavalry, primary second rank, and left Commander-in-Chief of the 5 armies of the capital. You are in charge of the large and small armies of the capital, and you are in charge of all the soldiers in the city." Since he was going to be put in an important position, and at this critical moment, a promotion was only natural. As for controlling all the soldiers in the city, this was naturally because of the urgency of the situation, and he had no choice but to give Zhu Qiyu this important authority. Zhu Qiyu was keenly aware that this was a battle of life and death, so he naturally could not be careless. Chapter 178. This subject accepts the decree and thanks for your Majesty's grace. Yang Chendong knelt and bowed. Zhu Qiyu had only accepted the decree and didn't make any promises. He knew that it wasn't enough to just give Yang Chendong military authority, and it was time to state the conditions that they had agreed on. Otherwise, if he didn't put in any effort, it would be equally dangerous. His gaze first swept across the officials before landing on Yang Chendong. This time, the Walla has invaded the borders and is heading straight for the capital, causing the capital to be in danger. I heard that the price of grain has skyrocketed, and the value of gold and silver has shrunk, causing the commoners to panic. With this in mind, we believe that this isn't only due to Ing Zongxin's defeat, but also due to the merchants taking advantage of the situation. Thus, we have decided to open a private bank among the commoners. Loyal and courageous Marquis, we wish to hand over this responsibility to you and request that you stabilize the price of goods in the capital in the shortest time possible. Are you able to do so? He first talked about the situation in the capital, and he didn't forget to mention the matter of Ing Zongxin's defeat. Then, he threw out the idea of establishing a private bank and asked for Yang Chendong's opinion. These scenes made the officials feel overwhelmed. Only Yang Chendong had an indifferent look on his face. He had long expected such a result. This was originally a matter that had been discussed. Just as Zhu Qiyu thought, if he was only given military authority and no other benefits, he might still defend the capital, but that was it. However, if he obtained enough benefits, he would be able to fight this battle beautifully. After kneeling and bowing 3 times, Yang Chendong finally revealed some gratitude. This subject is willing to establish a private bank and contribute to the economic development of the Great Ming Dynasty and the stability of the country. At the same time, this subject intends to change the name of the private bank to the Yang Family Bank. At that time, this subject will pay 2 million taels of silver to the national treasury every year as business tax. I ask for your Majesty's permission. Hiss. A series of gasps could be heard in the hall. As for the matter of establishing a bank and changing its name to the Yang Family Bank, many people still didn't understand what was going on. However, there was one sentence that was very clear. That was, if a bank was willing to hand over 2 million taels of silver to the national treasury, that was equivalent to half of the annual agricultural tax. What kind of figure was this? It was also money that many officials could not earn in their lifetime or even several lifetimes. However, it was easily promised by Yang Chendong. How could people not be shocked when they heard it? For real. Emperor Zhu Qiyu was the most surprised. If you don't manage the household, you don't know the cost of firewood and rice. These words were also applicable to the emperor. Originally, Zhu Qiyu only wanted to be a Yuan. She only saw the emperor's awe-inspiring appearance and how everyone responded to his call. However, after becoming the emperor, he realized that money was the most important thing in a country. Money was needed for a natural disaster. Building irrigation works required money. Building a city required money. More money was needed to raise officials and soldiers. In short, if one wanted to be a wise emperor who was praised by everyone, then he needed to use countless amounts of money to solve everything and strive to satisfy more people. This was the emperor's task. Although Ren Xian's rule was first and the national treasury was abundant, a lot of money was used in the Battle of the Tumu Castle. After the defeat, it was unknown how much money was needed to compensate the soldiers and soldiers. Moreover, there were 2 emperors ruling at the same time. The income of a country was divided into 2 parts. As a result, it was foreseeable that in the future, there would be more income and less expenditure. Moreover, if he wanted to become a truly famous ruler, the task of unifying the entire country was a must. It was very likely that he would have to fight with Zhu Qizhen. If he wanted to fight a war, who knew how much money he would need? As a result, how to generate income became the focus of the work in the future. At this time, Yang Chendong stood up and said that he would set up a Yang Family Bank and would be able to send 2 million taels of tax every year. How could this not make Zhu Qiyu's heart blossom with joy? A Yang Family Bank could pay 2 million taels a year. If there were 10 such banks, then wouldn't the problem of expenditure be solved? Wouldn't they be able to deposit more taels into the national treasury? In his joy, he couldn't help but cry out in surprise. Cough, cough. Jining, who was standing at the side, coughed softly. She used this method to remind Zhu Qiyu of his loss of composure in front of the palace. At this moment, the emperor also reacted. He quickly made up for it. Good, very good. Since the loyal marquis is so confident, we will deposit 500,000 taels first. Depositing 500,000 taels of silver was nothing to an emperor. This was just Zhu Qiyu's way of expressing his support for this matter. Many thanks, Your Majesty, for being the first customer of the Yang family bank to deposit money. This subject will give you a monthly interest of 0.45%. That is, 500,000 taels of silver. The monthly interest is 2,250 taels of silver. Yang Chendong quickly thought and gave an answer. With a monthly interest of 0.45%, that was 100 taels of silver. The monthly interest would be 450 taels of silver. 1,000 taels of silver would be 450 taels of silver. 10,000 taels of silver would be 45 taels of silver. This kind of interest was still very high. At least, it was higher than the current interest of a modern bank. This naturally became a great temptation, causing the eyes of the other ministers to light up when they heard the result. 500,000 taels of silver. The monthly interest would be 2,000 taels of silver. That was enough money for many large families to spend for 2 to 3 months or even longer. Although there were very few people who had so much savings, they should have at least 50,000 taels of silver. This way, the monthly interest of the Yang family bank would be 200 taels of silver. No matter how one looked at it, it was appropriate. Not only were the officials shocked by this result, even Zhu Qiyu was shocked by Yang Chendong's words. Loyal Marquis, do you know that the words of the emperor are not joking? This subject naturally knows. Your Majesty only needs to prepare the silver. Once we win this battle to protect the capital, the Yang family bank will quickly be established. At that time, Your Majesty only needs to send people to deliver the silver and then collect the monthly interest. Yang Chendong said with confidence. Although the interest of this deposit was not low, it was nothing compared to the interest he set for the loan. As a modern person, he naturally knew that money only had an important use in circulation. If everyone saved their silver and did not use it to stimulate consumption, the progress of society would be much slower. Zhu Qiyu naturally believed Yang Chendong's words. In front of the officials, he said, "Good, then we will wait for the opening of the Yang family bank." Ha ha ha. With Zhu Qiyu's laughter, the court session came to a successful conclusion. However, when the officials walked out of the hall, not many of them revealed relaxed expressions. First, they still doubted whether Yang Chendong, who was not even 20 years old, really had the ability to protect the capital. Second, was opening that bank really that profitable? If so, should they deposit their money in it? The officials all had their own thoughts. Yang Chendong did not leave with the officials. Instead, after watching Emperor Zhu Qiyu leave, he was called to the side by Jining to discuss the details of the next step. Jining was resting in a courtyard within the palace. In a pavilion built on water, the two of them sat facing each other. Loyal Marquis, have a taste of this Duke's tea leaves. Jining was all smiles. The defense of the capital would depend on this person, so this was naturally not the time to be giving him the cold shoulder. On the contrary, he was waiting for Yang Chendong to state his conditions, the treatment of the mercenaries. Both Zhu Qiyu and Jining were keenly aware of this. They had placed Yang Chendong in command not because of his military talent, but because he could directly order the mercenaries with the new firearms. Even Yang Chendong himself knew that relying on the 10,000-some soldiers in the capital was simply not enough. In the end, he still had to rely on the new soldiers he had trained. Since this was the case, he naturally had to obtain enough benefits. Otherwise, this opportunity to demand an exorbitant price would be hard to come by again. The tea leaves are pretty good. It seems that eunuch Jin has some good stuff, Yang Chendong said with a dazzling smile, seemingly very satisfied with Jin Ying's hospitality. Since this was a negotiation, a relatively harmonious atmosphere was naturally of utmost importance. It was not a life-and-death battle between two enemies. It was just a matter of money. This required excellent patience and a good atmosphere. Ha ha ha, loyal Marquis, you praise me too much. This duke is simply being rewarded by His Majesty. Jin Ying threw his head back and heartily laughed, his good mood written all over his face. How could he not know that this was an opportunity for Yang Chendong to ask for benefits, as well as an opportunity for him to obtain benefits? Although the two of them were very different in age, they both had the heart of a fox. Using a large fox and a small fox to make up the situation was not excessive at all. As expected, His Majesty's rewards are always the best. Yang Chendong said with some emotion. Then, he brought up the main topic. But I wonder what kind of reward His Majesty will give for using the mercenaries this time. Finally, they talked about the main topic. At this moment, Jin Ying's expression became much more serious. But I wonder how many mercenaries loyal Marquis has invited this time, and what are their chances of defeating Walla's army? It seemed that Jin Ying was much more mature than Yang Chendong, as if he had always held the initiative. Yang Chendong did not care about this. With the mercenaries in hand, the initiative was in his hands. As for who made the first request, in his opinion, it did not matter. This was not an equal negotiation and transaction to begin with. How much chance of victory there is, how many mercenaries can be invited to help, all depends on how determined His Majesty is. Yang Chendong picked up the teacup and took a sip. At the same time, he spoke with confidence. Chapter 179. Oh. Based on what you're saying, if the Emperor's reward is enough, we can definitely win this battle? Jin Ying was not very interested in Yang Chendong's boasting. He was just a young boy who was not even 20 years old. He had only been on the battlefield once and relied on his so-called advanced firearms to save Zhu Qizhen. Did he really think that he could treat all the heroes of the world as if they were nothing? Could he really treat the Tile army as if they were invisible? Wasn't he being too arrogant? Jin Ying wanted to strike a blow at Yang Chendong and weaken his momentum. Then, during the negotiations, he would have more power to take the initiative and naturally be able to obtain more benefits. Yes. Marquis has absolute confidence, Yang Chendong replied confidently. There was still a calm smile on his face. How could he not see Jin Ying's intentions? How could he not know that war was ever-changing? Logically speaking, even if you had great power, you could not speak too confidently. But this time, he was going to do the opposite. He had absolute confidence that he could win this battle. All of this came from his confidence in the firearms in the warehouse and his absolute trust in the cold front. He was about to bring the tea to his mouth and see how Yang Chendong would answer his question. As long as he said something that lacked confidence, that would be the time for Jin Ying to press the issue. Then, when the time came, he would be able to lower his demands to the minimum. Then, he would be able to make a contribution in front of Zhu Qiyu and think of a way to obtain more benefits for himself. However, before he could drink the tea, Yang Chendong had already given him an answer. It was an answer that was certain and confident. He said that he had absolute confidence in defeating the Walla's army. This answer was completely out of Jin Ying's expectations. After a moment of shock, a cautious light flashed through his eyes. He said, "Marquis, war is not a game. You can't just talk about it casually. You have to see blood and kill." Of course, Marquis knows this. When Marquis saved Ing Zong and the 9 important officials at Tumu Castle, he also saw blood. Who knows how many of the Walla army died at Marquis' hands? Of course, I know this very well. In response to Jin Ying's question, Yang Chendong responded with a smile. He looked very casual and confident. "Marquis, are you that confident? This time, you're not trying to break out of the encirclement while the Walla's army is not paying attention. Instead, you're trying to stop the enemy outside the country? Then, you might be facing a large group of the enemy's army? Jin Ying's tone of voice was still somewhat skeptical. When the Tumu castle was defeated, it was true that Yang Chendong had saved Yingzong and the 9 important officials. But at the time, he had chosen to go in the opposite direction of the enemy. He had not taken the shortest path back to the capital, but had instead circled around to the enemy's empty rear. Ji Ning had long ago had the embroidered uniform guard investigate this matter. It was precisely for this reason that he believed that while the strength of the mercenaries was impressive, they could only fight on a small scale. In a real battle, these so-called new firearms would not be of much use. Based on what he understood, Ji Ning did not believe that the mercenaries were omnipotent and invincible. But what he did not know was that the reason he had chosen to go to the enemy's rear rather than to protecting Zhong was because Yang Chendong had intended to do so. He had done this in order to prepare for the simultaneous reign of 2 emperors and give Zhu Qiyu enough time to ascend the throne. Otherwise, if he had really taken the shortest path to the capital with the Lengfeng army, how could there have been the matter of Zhu Qiyu ascending the throne? Of course, Yang Chendong wouldn't explain this to anyone. Otherwise, everyone would know what Sima Zhao's intentions were. It was precisely because he could not explain this matter to anyone that Ji Ning had misunderstood. He thought that the mercenaries were only slightly stronger than ordinary soldiers and were not truly invincible. Since he had questions, he naturally had to answer them. In response, Yang Chendong smiled and said, "Marquis said that we can defeat the Walla army, so we can naturally do it. Of course, this all depends on how much silver His Majesty can give us. As the saying goes, before the troops and horses move, the provisions move first. I'm sure Eunuch Jin understands this principle. This is only natural." Ji Ning nodded. Seeing Yang Chendong so confident and giving such an absolute answer when asked about the outcome of the war, the great eunuch was very curious as to how much this person wanted. Since the loyal Marquis is so confident, this is naturally a great thing. Presumably, when we really win the battle, the Emperor and the common people will definitely be grateful to the loyal Marquis. However, I wonder how much money it will cost. There's no need to say thanks. As a subject of the great Ming Dynasty, one of Marquis' responsibilities is to defend the country from the enemy. At the very least, the amount of silver is not what Marquis wants. It's just that the strength of the mercenaries is too great. The price to pay for their help is very high. Yang Chendong looked as if he wanted to explain in detail, but he was interrupted by Ji Ning. "Alright, we are all understanding people and smart people. There's no need to go into so much detail. You only need to tell me the amount of silver you need. When the time comes, I will naturally report it to His Majesty." Ji Ning interrupted Ji Ning. This was her way of expressing her reluctance. At the same time, it was also a signal that everyone was understanding people. There was no need to beat around the bush. It was better to directly state the amount of benefits needed in order to be willing to work. Ji Ning felt that she had seen through the loyal Marquis. Yang Chendong did not explain this. There were many things that had to be told in the end. Before that, everything would be in vain. He only chuckled and said, "Eunuch Jin is a straightforward person. Since that's the case, Marquis will not be pretentious. How about this, we need this amount to win this battle." As he spoke, Yang Chendong extended his right index finger. 1 million? Ji Ning chuckled. She had thought that Yang Chendong would ask for an exorbitant amount. However, when she saw that he had only extended a single finger, she immediately laughed. Young people were young. Their appetite was small and their determination was lacking. He had exposed his bottom line so quickly, and it was only 1 million taels of silver. Chuckling, Ji Ning once again brought the tea to her mouth. The corners of her mouth curled up into a mocking smile. Yang Chendong also chuckled. He was in no hurry to explain. When he saw Jining pour the tea into her mouth, he suddenly said, I think eunuch Jin has misunderstood. It's not 1 million but 10 million. Pfft. As expected, she spat out a mouthful of tea. Seated across from her, Yang Chendong was prepared. He casually tilted his body, allowing the tea to fly past him without splashing on his body. Jining did not care about this sudden loss of composure. He didn't even ask if the tea had landed on Yang Chendong. Instead, he glared at the person in front of him. After around 4 or 5 breaths, he clenched his teeth and squeezed out each word. Loyal Marquis, this is not the way to ask for benefits. Even if the capital is somewhat dangerous, this is not the time to ask for an exorbitant amount. Although she warned Yang Chendong, she was inwardly cursing his greed. 10 million taels of silver? Did she think that silver could fall from the heavens? If there really was 10 million taels of silver, who knew how many soldiers could be trained and how many elite divisions could be created? No, no, no. Yang Chendong raised his right index finger and shook his head. This isn't asking for an exorbitant amount. This is just how much the war needs. If it can't be satisfied, then it's fine. Marquis won't lead the army. Yang Chendong leaned back in his chair, his relaxed expression seeming to say that he had not asked for this matter. Someone else had asked him to do it, and he was only reluctantly doing it. Yang Chendong had an indifferent look on his face, as if he had no interest in this so-called military authority. As a result, Jining felt as if she had punched cotton. Having Yang Chendong lead the army was a matter that had been decided in the imperial court, and it could not be easily changed. Not to mention, apart from Yang Chendong, there were no other suitable candidates at the moment. If they randomly sent someone and lost the war in the end, the consequences would not be acceptable to everyone. Jin Ying's expression changed again and again. She took 2 quick breaths and suppressed the anger in her heart. She opened her mouth and said, Loyal Marquis, even if you say that before the troops and horses are mobilized, the provisions will come first, but isn't 10 million a little too much? Not at all, not at all. Seeing that Jining was beginning to take his request seriously, Yang Chendong had a carefree smile on his face as he said, Eunuch Jin probably doesn't know, but for the sake of victory, I invited 300 more mercenaries. Together with the 100 left in the capital, that's a total of 400. Is this correct? That's how the bill is calculated, but there's no need for 10 million taels of silver. Jining was naturally overjoyed to hear that another 300 elite mercenaries had come, but she was still a little conflicted about 10 million taels of silver. Yang Chendong didn't mind and continued to calculate. 400 mercenaries. Normally, each of them would cost 10,000 taels of silver. I trust that Eunuch Jin has heard of this before. Correct. Although 10,000 taels of silver per person is a high price, if they truly do have exceptional fighting strength, it's still barely acceptable. But even so, it's only 4 million taels of silver. Where did 10 million come from? Jining anxiously retorted. Eunuch Jin, there's no need to be in such a rush. Wait until Marquis has finished calculating the bill before you speak, all right? A hint of displeasure appeared on Yang Chendong's face. Presumably, anyone who was constantly interrupted would be unhappy. Chapter 180. All right. Forget about the loyal Marquis for now. I will listen. Jining was very good at reading people's expressions. Otherwise, he would not have been placed in such an important position by Zhu Qiyu. He naturally noticed Yang Chendong's displeasure. In order to prevent the situation from becoming tense, he could only obediently shut his mouth. Jining did not interrupt. Yang Chendong's expression became better. He continued, normally, it is true that hiring a mercenary soldier for a mission costs 10,000 taels of silver per person. However, the same mission should not be of different levels. For example, some missions are simple and easy to complete. Of course, this price is acceptable. However, this time, we are fighting with fewer people. If we use the previous price to calculate, it will not work. I won't hide it from Eunuch Jean. Marquis had already seen the urgency of the situation. Thus, he had already discussed with the leader of the mercenary soldiers. He asked for their help at a price of 20,000 taels of silver per person. Only then did he convince them. Based on this calculation, 400 people would be 8 million taels of silver. Adding on the military expenses and food for the 10,000 soldiers of the city defense army, it would be at least 1 million taels of silver. In the end, the remaining 1 million taels of silver is for Eunuch Jin's hard work. I believe Eunuch Jin will not refuse. Based on this calculation, Marquis is the one who is doing the work but not getting anything out of it. Sigh. Finally, he finished speaking. However, after he finished speaking, Yang Chendong purposely acted as if he had been greatly wronged. It was as if he had done all this for nothing. Sitting there and listening, when he heard that the cost of hiring 400 elite soldiers was 8 million taels of silver, his eyes widened. His face was filled with disbelief. It was no wonder he was so surprised. With 8 million taels of silver, he would be able to find a way to scrape together millions of soldiers. However, there were only 400 soldiers going to battle. This ratio was too great. However, when Yang Chendong finished speaking and said that he had left him 1 million taels of silver, Jin Ying's expression became much better. She sighed inwardly at Yang Chendong's sensibility. No wonder this person could become good friends with Wang Zhen. This kind of consideration for his friends was very likable. However, when he thought about it from another perspective, 10 million gold coins was a large expenditure. When he reported it to Zhu Qiyu, there was a chance that he would be rejected. Thus, he said with a bitter expression, "Loyalty Marquis, this duke appreciates your good intentions. However, 10 million gold coins is truly too much. See if you can reduce it by half. This duke's share can also be reduced by half." Jin Ying endured the pain as she thought about how she had gained both the benefits and Zhu Qiyu's favor. In this way, her benefits would be reduced by a total of 500,000 taels. With this money, he could have more people become his trusted aides. This was an extremely good thing for increasing his strength. She really wanted to be a whore but also wanted to set up a memorial archway. Yang Chendong despised Jin Ying in his heart, but he spoke with certainty, "My 9 million is not 1 tael less." Of course, if Eunuch Jin wants to be more spirited, then 9,500,000 taels will do. Clearly, the 500,000 taels that Yang Chendong asked for were the 500,000 taels that were given to Jin Ying. The amount didn't change. The only thing that changed was her share of the benefits. How could Jin Ying be willing to accept this? She shook her head and said, "How can this be? Since it's like this, then 10 million taels will do." Just as she finished speaking, Jin Ying continued with a worried expression, "But Loyalty Marquis, I'm afraid that His Majesty won't agree to such a large sum of money at once. Also, I'm afraid that the Ministry of Revenue won't be able to gather so much money in such a short time." Seeing that Jin Ying had accepted this reality, the corners of Yang Chendong's mouth curled up into a smile. Eunuch Jin doesn't need to worry about this. Marquis has already thought of a solution for His Majesty. The National Treasury won't be able to take out so much money in such a short time. It's fine to say this to others, but I'm sure that Eunuch Jin and Marquis both know this. But to take out 10 million taels of silver at once, I'm sure that even His Majesty's heart will ache. If that's the case, the National Treasury can take out an advance of 5 million taels of silver. I'm sure that this amount should be enough to convince His Majesty. Jin Ying was naturally overjoyed to hear this. That's right. If it's only 5 million taels of silver, it will naturally be much easier to convince His Majesty. But this way, how can we convince the mercenaries? Do we have to give them the money in installments? Of course not. How could the money used for war be given in installments? That would create a major problem. Yang Chendong shook his head. If it can't be given in installments, then what about the remaining 5 million taels of silver? Ji Ning was somewhat confused by Yang Chendong's words. Don't worry, Eunuch Jin. Marquis thinks like this. Aren't there still many properties belonging to the imperial household in the capital? For example, the deeds to many houses and residences belong to His Majesty, so it's better to sell them to Marquis at a discount. Think about it, if the capital really can't be protected, these things can't be taken away just because His Majesty says so. It's better to sell them to Marquis at a discount and use them as the 5 million taels of silver. As for Marquis, he'll naturally find a way to gather the 5 million taels for war. Eunuch Jin will also need to make a trip to the newly appointed Minister of Revenue, Jin Lian. At the very least, no one will be lacking in benefits. Chuckling, Yang Chendong set his sights on the best houses in the capital. This was one of the goals of his trip. It was said that the antiques of prosperous times were the gold of troubled times. In truth, houses were also extremely cheap items in troubled times. At crucial times, everyone would be thinking about saving their lives, so who would buy a house? At that time, even if it was given away for free, no one would dare to stay. Yang Chendong understood this principle, so how could Ji Ning not? With the Walla's army approaching the capital, the people were panicking, and house prices were plummeting by the day. Even so, there were still more people selling than buying. One could say that houses were the most worthless thing in the world. And if she could convert this worthless thing into money and give it to Yang Chendong, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? With these houses, Yang Chendong would probably have to do everything he could to protect the capital. This seemed like a perfect solution, and it would be much easier to use this as an excuse to persuade Zhu Qiyu. Not to mention, he would be able to earn some money from buying and selling the houses. As for the Bureau of Revenue, given his status, who would dare to stop him if he wanted to do something? When she thought about how she could get this job done and still make a profit, Jin Ying's complexion visibly improved. Good, good, the loyal Marquis's intentions are good. Since this is the case, this association will immediately report to His Majesty. I presume that this matter won't be too difficult to handle. Ji Ning regained her confident expression. It was as if everything had returned to her control. After negotiating the terms, Ji Ning wanted to see the Emperor, Zhu Qiyu. Her eyes were filled with eagerness. In response, Yang Chendong showed no intention of rising. Instead, he raised his teacup and leisurely said, Eunuch Jin, there is one more matter that I don't know if you know. Marquis has suddenly been suspended from his post in the embroidered uniform guard. Now that I mention it, this was a post that His Majesty personally conferred upon him. For what reason? Ji Ning had been thinking about how to report this matter to Zhu Qiyu when she heard Yang Chendong's words, and her face instantly paled. There was such a thing? This eunuch was unaware. Oh, then it must have been a subordinate acting on his own initiative. Speaking of which, it's just a post as the commander of the embroidered uniform guard. Marquis doesn't care much about it. However, now that the entire nation is focused on fighting against foreign enemies, if people find out that Marquis has been suspended from his post, it's inevitable that some people will let their imaginations run wild and think that Marquis has done something wrong to incur the Emperor's wrath. If that's the case, it's extremely disadvantageous for Marquis to lead troops into battle. Yang Chendong spoke with a faint smile, but it was clear that there was still a trace of anger in his eyes. He was clearly a little angry. Ji Ning was indeed unaware of this matter. Although the commander of the embroidered uniform guard was his trusted aide, Lv Gui, he didn't report everything to him. His main duty was to stay by His Majesty's side. Only when something major happened would he report to him. Therefore, when he first heard Yang Chendong say that he had been suspended from his post, he was stunned. When he heard the consequences of this, he felt that the matter was a little serious. At this moment, Yang Chendong's authority was not to be questioned. Otherwise, how could he lead troops into battle? How could he carry out orders and prohibitions? Marquis of Loyalty, I really don't know about this matter. Your post as the commander of the embroidered uniform guard was indeed conferred by His Majesty. Even if something happens, it should be up to His Majesty to decide. This time, LV Gui and the others have overstepped their boundaries. I ask that Marquis of Loyalty not take issue with them. Now, I can announce that your post as the commander of the embroidered uniform guard has been reinstated. After this, I will find LV Gui and have him apologize to you. Ji Ning, who knew the importance of this matter, immediately expressed his opinion and placed Yang Chendong in an important position. Alright, then I'll have to trouble Eunuch Jin. Since that's the case, Marquis will go to patrol the city and meet with the generals. Oh right, I'll have to trouble Eunuch Jin to hurry up with the matter of the silver. Walla's army will soon arrive at the city. If they aren't in place by then, Marquis can't guarantee that the soldiers will fight with their lives. As for the matters at the Ministry of Revenue, I'll arrange for my cousin Yang Fu to go there. If there's anything, you can discuss it. Yang Chendong finally stood up. He had said what he needed to say and done what he needed to do. It was time to prepare for the war. Good, good. Don't worry, Marquis of Loyalty. I'll go see His Majesty now. The silver will be quickly sent over. Alright, I'll have to trouble Eunuch Jin. Oh right, LV Gui should be Eunuch Jin's man. Since that's the case, when the silver arrives, ask him to find Marquis to get your 1 million taels. Yang Chendong chuckled, then cupped his fists and bowed before leaving the palace. Chapter 181. Yang Chendong had specifically asked Lu Gui to come and get the silver. It was clear that he wanted to make things difficult for Lu Gui and take revenge for his previous suspension. How could Jining not see that? She just thought that since Lu Gui had been wronged, then he had to pay the price for his mistake. It was just lowering his head and admitting his mistake. Presumably, Lu Gui did not have the guts to not listen to her and not lower his head. After Yang Chendong left, Jining went to the palace where Zhu Qiyu was resting. She picked out some things that could be said about what had just been discussed. When Jining said that Yang Chendong needed 10 million taels of silver to guarantee victory, Zhu Qiyu was shocked. What? Does fighting a battle require so much silver? It was no wonder that Zhu Qiyu was so surprised. Ever since he had taken the throne, he had never experienced this. Previously, when Shiheng had left the city to fight, he had been in too much of a hurry. He had only asked the Ministry of Revenue to replenish some provisions before leaving. At that time, Zhu Qiyu was still trying to stabilize his position and did not think too much about it. Now, when he heard that fighting a battle required so much silver, he was naturally surprised and even shocked. He continued to listen. When he heard that he only needed to pay 5 million taels of silver and the rest could be offset by real estate in the capital, he breathed a sigh of relief. However, he still had a stomach full of doubts. My dear subject, does fighting a battle require so much silver? Although Jining was very trusted by Zhu Qiyu and held great power, she also knew that the emperor's inquiry could not be concealed. Otherwise, once she lost the emperor's favor, she would lose everything. Your Majesty, normally we don't need so much money to fight a war, but this time we used the loyal Marquis. He also invited the mercenaries with advanced firearms to help. More than 80% of the money is for them to use. According to what the loyal Marquis said, the ammunition for that kind of firearm is very expensive. Moreover, with our great Ming's technology, it is impossible to make it. That is why the price is so high. I see. After listening, Zhu Qiyu couldn't help but sigh and say, my great Ming dynasty has a vast territory and abundant resources. Why can't we make an advanced firearm? After this battle, we have to urge the weapons workshop to hurry up and develop them. Your Majesty is wise. This subject will remember this matter. However, do you think we should agree to the request of the loyal Marquis? The situation is perilous, and the Tile army can arrive at any time. If we don't settle down and miss this chance, the capital will be in danger, Jining anxiously asked Zhu Qiyu, still thinking about the benefits that belonged to her. Promise him. As long as we can protect the capital and repel the Walla, all he needs is some money and property. What's wrong with giving it to him? Just as my beloved official said, this is my country, my world. Everything here belongs to me. Naturally, I can take back what I have given away at any time. Zhu Qiyu stood there with his back straight and his eyes looking into the distance. At this moment, he exuded the aura of an emperor. When these words reached Jin Ying's ears, he couldn't help but kneel on the ground in submission. Your Majesty is wise. This subject will do as you say. Jin Ying left. After receiving Zhu Qiyu's decree, the Ministry of Revenue quickly took out 5 million taels of silver and sent it to Yang Chendong's immortal abode. Yang Fu was also invited to the Ministry of Revenue to discuss the matter of property. Although Yang Fu was Yang Chendong's older cousin, he had long been impressed by his younger cousin's methods in Jianghu Prefecture. Later on, because of his outstanding performance, he had been assigned to manage the realm beyond heaven and the immortal abode, wielding great authority. Now that Yang Chendong had arranged for him to go to the Ministry of Revenue to discuss matters, how could he dare to be negligent? After meeting with his younger cousin and understanding Yang Chendong's intentions, he set out. With the money and provisions gradually arriving, the commander-in-chief, Yang Chendong, began to get busy. The first thing he did was summon the commanders of the central, eastern, western, southern, and northern cities, the 5 commanders of the 5 armies, to the immortal abode for a meeting. Yang Chendong had been made general of swift cavalry and left commander of the 5 armies of the capital. He was in charge of all military affairs in the capital, large and small. The order to control all the soldiers in the city had been passed down long ago, and the 5 commanders were all waiting for Yang Chendong to summon them. When the order arrived, the 5 commanders were escorted by a few personal guards to a private room on the 2nd floor of the immortal abode. As commanders of the 5 cities' military office, they were also called commanders. Their positions were not very high, only at the 6th rank, and they were considered military officials. In an environment where the emphasis was placed on literature and the suppression of military might, generals were not valued, and they were even inferior to some of the 7th-rank civil officials. In a place like the immortal abode, they rarely visited. Their positions were low, and their incomes were low. Even when they occasionally visited, they would only be looking for a seat in the main hall. They rarely even visited the private rooms on the 1st floor, much less the private rooms on the 2nd floor. Only platinum card members were allowed to enter, and these were people who were either extremely wealthy or extremely noble. This time, they had been summoned by Yang Chendong to enjoy such treatment. When they reached the 2nd floor, they were extremely cautious. Even when they saw the azure-robed Yang Chendong in the private room, they were still very cautious. You're all here. Take a seat. He looked at the 5 commanders of the 5 armies. They were Tao Jin, Yang Jia, Gao Li, Mao Fushou, and Sun Tong. As generals in charge of defending the capital, there was a limit to what they could do. No one could have imagined that someone would come knocking on their door, so these 5 were not skilled fighters. On the contrary, they had only obtained their current positions because of the influence of their ancestors. But because Yingzong and Shiheng had suffered consecutive defeats, the capital had become dangerous, and their positions had become extremely important. It was precisely because their positions were so important that the 5 of them began to think of ways to leave their current positions. Perhaps it was because they were cowards, or perhaps it was because they knew their own weight, but there was no way they could win in this kind of war. This forced them to find other methods. It was as if among the 4 of them, apart from Sun Tong, the other 4 had all found some connections. It was just that time was short, and this was a position that no one could avoid, so Tao Jin and the others had not been able to find a suitable replacement. The situation had already been thoroughly investigated by the Security Bureau, and Yang Chendong was naturally very clear about it. And this time, he called the 5 of them over. To put it bluntly, he wanted to reorganize the internal affairs. He would definitely not allow unstable factors and situations to appear in the midst of a war. The 5 of them stood in front of Yang Chendong with apprehension. When they heard that they could sit down, the 5 of them cupped their fists and said respectfully, "Thank you, Marquis." Seeing that the 5 of them had found a place to sit down, Yang Chendong waved his hand and said to Tiger's Mane, who was waiting at the door, "Pass down the order. Don't serve the dishes yet, and there's no need for anyone to serve here. Everything will be discussed after Marquis has finished discussing matters." "Yes," Tiger's Mane replied, then closed the door of the private room and waited there. At the same time, his ears perked up to ensure that if anything happened in the room, he could immediately rush in to protect the young master's safety. The room was closed, and there was no one else in the room. There wasn't even a cup of tea to quench their thirst. For a moment, the 5 of them felt waves of nervousness, and the more cowardly ones began to break out in cold sweat. Yang Chendong saw the 5 of them's expressions, and for the time it took to drink a cup of tea, he did not say a word. It was this overly quiet scene that caused the 5 commanders' mentality to undergo a huge change. They were not sure what their boss's temper was like. What would he do next? The room was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Just when the commanders were so nervous that they did not dare to wipe off the cold sweat on their heads, Yang Chendong, who was sitting at the head of the table, spoke. "The 5 of you, Walla's army will invade the capital in a few days. Do you have the courage to fight?" "Yes." After being stunned for a moment, the 5 of them replied in unison. There were only 5 of them, and their voices were not in unison. Some were loud, some were soft, some were strong, and some were weak. This was a sign that they were lacking in confidence. Yang Chendong, who had seen everything, suddenly snorted, "Do you really have the courage? If I let you lead your troops out of the city to fight, how confident are you in winning?" "Ah. This." When Tao Jin and the other 3 heard that Yang Chendong was sending them out of the city to fight, they were momentarily speechless. Sometimes, it was one thing to boast, but it was another thing to actually do it. Take them for example. Usually, they were full of vigor when dealing with disobedient commoners in the city. However, if they were to really fight against Walla, perhaps before they even reached the battlefield, they would be so scared that their legs would go soft. Tao Jin and the other 3 were a little hesitant, but Sun Tong directly stood up and said with an imposing voice, "We are paid by the imperial court. If there is a war, we will fight." You are not bad." After looking at Sun Tong for a while, Yang Chendong's face showed a trace of a smile. With Sun Tong taking the lead, the other 4 were not as confident, but at this time, they could only express their stance one by one, saying that if there was an order, they would obey. Yang Chendong did not take Tao Jin and the other 3's stance to heart. The 6th young master Yang, who had personally been on the battlefield and completed countless missions, knew very well what kind of people could be used and what kind of people could not be used on the battlefield. There was a saying that one should not be afraid of a wolf-like opponent, but a pig-like teammate. Since he knew the temperament of Tao Jin and the other 3, Yang Chendong naturally knew what to do next. "Good, Marquis has seen everyone's performance. Next, we will make appropriate work arrangements according to each of your conditions. When the time comes, you only need to obey the military orders. Come, serve the dishes." After understanding the situation, which was very similar to what the Security Bureau understood, Yang Chendong had a basic understanding of the 5 people in his heart. Chapter 182. The dishes were finally ready to be served, and the atmosphere was no longer oppressive. On the contrary, because the dishes were all very expensive, and some of them were even dishes that the 5 of them had heard about but could not afford due to their lack of money. Everyone began to wolf down the food. Once the wine was served, the 5 of them began to toast Yang Chendong to express their respect as subordinates. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yang Chendong divided everyone's work while drinking with the 5 of them. Based on what he had said, other than Sun Tong, who was working with him against Walla's army, the other 4 commanders would each take 200 men to maintain order in the capital. Even though the warden's office had transferred many soldiers from the 5 cities to the battlefield in the last 2 wars, each commander originally had more than 1,000 men under their command. Now that only 200 men had been left behind, their authority had been greatly reduced, but none of the 4 complained. This was because they did not need to go to the battlefield to face a battle of life and death. As long as they could stay alive, it didn't matter how many soldiers they led. After figuring out the thoughts of the 5 men, Yang Chendong took away their military power after a meal, and transferred 4,200 warriors from the warden's office of the 5 cities to serve him. How could Tao Jin and the other 3 not see that Yang Chendong was seizing military authority? But none of them expressed any objection. This was their so-called tacit understanding. As long as they could stay alive, they didn't care if their authority was reduced or not. After obtaining the military authority of the 5 cities' warden's office, Yang Chendong had accomplished his first task. After sending off the 5 of them, his second order was to open the gates and allow the common people to freely choose whether to leave or stay. Originally, when the main gate had been closed, only the side gates had been opened, and a strict inspection had been carried out. But now, the policies at the city gates had undergone a massive change. The commoners could enter and leave the city at any time. Everyone quickly spread the news. In just one day, more than 400 households had left the city. 2,000 to 3,000 of them were commoners. Because of this matter, the eunuchs in the palace received orders from Jianghu to inquire about it. The answer they received was that all of this was done by the Duke of Loyalty. The reason was that if the situation in the city was unstable, once they faced the Walla's army head-on, wouldn't they fall short of success? In order to ensure the absolute safety of the capital, any unstable factors had to be dealt with in advance. When this news reached the palace, first into the ears of Jianghu, then into the ears of Emperor Zhu Qiu, this matter was quickly ignored. Using Zhu Qiu's words, one should never doubt the people one used. Since he allowed Yang Chendong to take control of the military, he could do whatever he wanted. He would support him unconditionally. Some of the officials in court disagreed with Yang Chendong's decision to allow the people and merchants to leave the capital. In their view, how could the people leave the city at any time? If this situation continued to spread and the capital became an empty city, how could the Walla's army defend the city when it attacked? Wouldn't they just be waiting for death? Wasn't letting the people leave the city the same as digging one's own grave? Most people had similar thoughts. Soon, memorials to impeach Yang Chendong were spread all over Zhu Qiu's desk. Regretfully, at this crucial moment, Emperor Daizong didn't even glance at these memorials, expressing his complete trust in Yang Chendong. He had not received any imperial edict to stop him. On the second day, even more people left the city. In just half a day, more than 5,000 people had left the city. Most of them were merchants who had business in the capital. Merchants valued profit over justice. In their view, it didn't matter who ruled over them. What was important was who could bring them benefits. With this traditional mindset, it was no wonder that they would choose to leave the city when a calamity was about to befall the capital. Before leaving the city, most of the people sold some of their properties and goods to Hu Yan and the other girls at a very low price. For a time, the girls were very busy, and Yang Chendong's business began to blossom all over the capital. In just 3 days, more than a quarter of the merchants in the capital had left. The Yang clan had also spent the 5 million taels of silver that they had prepared. Even Jianghu had spent 2 million taels of the 5 million taels that the emperor had allocated to him. With 7 million taels of silver and the cheap properties of the imperial household that Yang Chendong had obtained from the Bureau of Revenue, 1% of the capital's businesses now belonged to Yang Chendong alone. In just 3 days, the Yang clan's businesses had more than doubled in size. In particular, almost 90% of the businesses on the street between the sky beyond heaven and the immortal abode were now under Yang Chendong's ownership. Even the location of the Yang clan's bank had been decided and renovated according to the Loyalty Marquis plan. Many people had taken note of Yang Chendong's actions. But they did nothing to stop him. On the contrary, they watched as things unfolded as if they were watching a show. Emperor Jing, Zhu Qiu, in particular, was watching all of this from the perspective of a spectator. On the first day that Yang Chendong had made his move, Zhu Qiu had received a report from Jining. But he was not alarmed. He was happy because the more Yang Chendong invested in the capital, the more confident he was in the defense of the capital. The more money he invested now, the greater his harvest would be in the future. It was precisely because there was no one to stop them that all the plans went smoothly. On the morning of the 4th day, a group of 500 embroidered uniform guards wearing flying fish robes appeared outside the immortal abode. Over the past few days, the immortal abode had become Yang Chendong's resting place. After all, now that he had taken command of the army, he could not return to the Yang clan manor like before. If something happened, wouldn't that delay his plans? It was precisely because Yang Chendong was staying in the immortal abode that the appearance of the 500 embroidered uniform guards caused Tiger's Mane, who was responsible for the young master's safety, to become extremely nervous. He hurriedly sent a message to the nearby company commander Xiao Feng, asking him to hurry over as quickly as possible. At the same time, he also instructed Qiu V's first squad of guards and Dao Xiao's second squad on the street across the street to prepare for any sudden changes. After making all the necessary preparations, Tiger's Mane went to see Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong had slept rather late last night after fighting with the 4 women. When Tiger's Mane arrived, he had just finished washing up and was about to eat breakfast. When he saw Tiger's Mane enter the room with a nervous expression, he couldn't help but smile. "What is it? Has the Walla's vanguard arrived?" "Not yet. The people from the Security Bureau have reported that their vanguard is still 200 li away from the capital. They'll probably arrive by nightfall." Tiger's Mane relayed the report to Yang Chendong. When he saw the young master looking at the report from the Security Bureau, he cautiously took half a step forward. "Young master, 500 embroidered uniform guards have arrived. They're currently guarding the entrance. However, I've already sent someone to call Company Commander Xiao Feng over. We definitely won't let them threaten the safety of this place. The embroidered uniform guards are here?" After listening to Tiger's Mane's report, Yang Chendong's face didn't show the slightest bit of surprise. Instead, he said, "This Jining is quite calm. Forget it, bring their leader in to see Marquis." Oh. Tiger's Mane originally thought that when the young master learned that so many embroidered uniform guards had arrived at the entrance, even if he wasn't nervous, he would at least show a certain amount of surprise. He never thought that he would still be so relaxed. Could it be that all of this was within the young master's plan? It must be. In Tiger's Mane's eyes, Yang Chendong was already a godlike existence. In his eyes, whatever the young master said was the truth, and whatever the young master did was the most correct. With this understanding, the originally nervous Tiger's Mane relaxed quite a bit. He nodded and turned to leave. Just as Yang Chendong had predicted, the embroidered uniform guards weren't here to cause trouble. They were here on orders from the head eunuch, Jining, to collect the silver. They'd previously agreed that Jining would receive 1 million silver out of the 5 million taels of silver. She'd also requested that the embroidered uniform guards commander Lu Gui personally come to collect the silver. This morning, Lu Gui had come to complete this mission. As for the reason he'd put on such a grand display, it was naturally to give Yang Chendong a show of strength and intimidate him. He wanted to let this Marquis know that the consequences of provoking the embroidered uniform guards were not to sleep well or eat well. Outside the immortal abode, the commander of the embroidered uniform guards, Lu Gui, and Commander Han Ji, were leisurely chatting. "Sir, don't you think the loyalty Marquis was scared witless after seeing such a scene?" "I saw the immortal abode's gates shut after we arrived," Han Ji said to Shengguan Lv Gui in a flattering manner, as if he were a petty person intoxicated with success. "Humph. He's just a scholar. How brave can he be? Actually, we're doing this for his own good. We're teaching him a lesson before the Walla's army arrives. We'll let him know what it means to be imposing, what it means to be afraid, and what it means to be timid." Ha ha ha. Lu Gui couldn't help but throw his head back and roar with laughter. Creak. The immortal abode's gates opened, and the tall tiger's mane walked out. He strode in front of Lv Gui and Han Ji, then spoke to them in a condescending manner. "The Marquis invites you in. Doesn't he have legs? Why doesn't he personally come out to greet our commander?" Seeing that the immortal abode had finally received the brunt of the attack, Han Ji wanted to use his aura to suppress the other party. However, as soon as the words left his mouth, before he could even reveal the slightest hint of a smile, he felt his vision go black. Then, he felt a sharp pain in his eye socket. Han Ji stumbled back 3 steps. Chapter 183. A straight punch gave him a black eye. As far as Tiger's mane was concerned, anyone who was disrespectful to the young master deserved to be beaten, regardless of their identity or who they were. Tiger's mane gave Han Ji a punch in public, but it shocked Lv Gui, who was watching the show from the side. Although his subordinate's words were a little arrogant, how could he casually make a move when he had something to say? It seemed that it was the privilege of the brocade-gowned guards to fight without saying a word. When was it the turn of others to treat them like this? "Brat, you're courting death." Feeling that this punch was aimed at the brocade-gowned guard's face, and after feeling that this punch had provoked his dignity, an angry roar came out of Lv Gui's mouth. As soon as his voice fell, the 2 trusted subordinates pulled out the embroidered spring sabers from their waists. The reaction of the 2 was not slow. To be able to become the trusted subordinates of the commander among the brocade-gowned guards, if they did not have some skills, how could they be competent? It was just that they were fast, but some people's reactions were faster than theirs. Just as the sabers were pulled out of the scabbard, 2 muffled sounds came, hitting the embroidered spring sabers that were pulled out. At this time, they saw that the scimitar had already fallen out of their hands and landed on the ground. The 2 trusted subordinates were frightened by this sudden change. They instinctively raised their heads to look, but there was nothing unusual in their eyes. What's going on? Under the silencer, when the gunshots were fired, outsiders did not hear it. Lv Gui, who was not far away, did not see anything wrong. All he saw was the action of the 2 trusted subordinates pulling out and throwing the sabers, so he asked angrily. At this moment, they could not even hold the sabers. It was really a loss of face for the brocade-gowned guards. Being angrily reprimanded by their superior, the 2 trusted subordinates did not dare to argue. They instinctively bent down to pick up the sabers, but just as they took a step forward, 2 muffled sounds came out, hitting in front of the 2 men's feet, raising a cloud of dust. It could be foreseen that if the 2 of them had taken a bigger step just now, the shot would have hit their feet. If that was the case, it would be hard to say if they would still be standing here in one piece. If the first shot did not make them understand what was going on, then the second shot completely broke their psychological defense, letting them know that they were just flesh and blood, and that they were so close to death. In an instant, the 2 of them who had been taught a lesson didn't dare to move. They maintained their posture, half-bent and motionless. The first time he shouted, Lv Gui didn't notice anything unusual. But just now, he had seen 2 clouds of dust fly up with his own eyes. After associating it with the results of the brocade guard's investigation, if he still didn't know what had happened, then his position as commander really wouldn't be given to such a fool. He knew that it must be the effect of the new firearms. At this moment, cold sweat kept breaking out on his forehead. In his heart, he kept asking, what kind of firearm is this? Why is it so accurate, and when it was shot, it didn't make any sound? Then, if this thing wanted to deal with him, wouldn't he have lost his life here? LV Gui was also frightened. Even when his subordinate maintained a somewhat ridiculous posture, he didn't reprimand him. On the other hand, Han Ji, who had been beaten, didn't see any of this and naturally didn't know what had happened. Seeing that he had been beaten and his superior didn't care, he angrily roared, "What are you all standing there for? Capture this person. He dares to provoke the brocade guard, he deserves to die. Yes, let's go together." After the other brocade guard heard Han Ji's order, they all shouted and pulled out their long swords, intending to attack. On the other hand, LV Gui saw the faint smile on the tiger's mane's face from the corner of his eye, and his heart trembled. "All of you, stop. Put your swords away, put them away." After what had just happened, he was very clear that if he chose to make a move right now, he and the other brocade guard would be the first to fall. Therefore, he hurriedly shouted and strode over to the black-eyed Han Ji. He swung his hand and gave him a slap. Slap. This slap was extremely solid. After the slap, LV Gui loudly reprimanded, "What are you shouting for? With me here, you don't have the right to speak." How could Han Ji know that LV Gui had only slapped him because he was on his side? The slap was painful, and a bloody handprint was left on his face. However, what hurt even more was the confusion and grievance in his heart. After the slap, LV Gui didn't pay him any more attention. Instead, he walked over to the tiger's main side. At this moment, he was like a completely different person. With a smile on his face, he said, "I'll have to trouble you to lead the way. Follow me." Seeing that his display of strength was effective, the tiger's mane didn't waste any more words with LV Gui. He nodded lightly, then turned around and walked into the interior of the immortal abode. LV Gui left, leaving behind Han Ji and the several hundred brocade guards standing there, looking at each other. They didn't understand. Wasn't he here to show off his strength to the loyal Marquis? How did it end up like this? How did he become someone who didn't fight back when he was hit or cursed? LV Gui entered the immortal abode and went up to the second floor, arriving at the private room where Yang Chendong had received him. As soon as he entered, the first thing he saw was Yang Chendong's back, clad in green robes. Even though he knew that LV Gui had walked in, Yang Chendong still didn't turn around. Instead, he said, "Commander, you really are stupid." LV Gui, who'd been reprimanded as soon as he entered the room, was first confused, then angry. No matter what, he was still the commander of the brocade guard. He had great authority, and he had the authority to arrest court officials and even dukes and marquises. He could execute them first and report later. So why was it that he'd been given the cold shoulder here? Then he'd been warned in secret. Now that he'd finally met the person in question, he hadn't even seen his true face. Why was he being reprimanded? With his status, even Jining had to treat him with a smile when assigning him a mission. Who did this Yang Chendong think he was? He was just a young man who hadn't even grown out his hair yet. Although he had military authority, his position in the brocade guard was still below his own. How dare he speak to him like this? With a face full of anger, he was just about to express his stance and even reprimand Yang Chendong when the Marquis of Loyal Courage, whose back was to him, spoke again. "Since you've come to take eunuch Jin's silver, with your status, you should know that this matter is confidential. Yet, you still brought so many people here with great fanfare. Do you want everyone in the world, including the Emperor, to know about this matter?" With this question, LV Gui, who'd been about to retort, immediately shut his mouth. He suddenly remembered that he'd come today to take the silver, but he seemed to have come to show off. Had things been ruined? Seeing LV Gui's face turn red and green, Yang Chendong laughed coldly in his heart. He laughed at the other's ignorance of the immensity of heaven and earth. He laughed at the other's selfishness over the public good. This kind of person was the existence he despised the most in his heart. A person could have a temper and personality, but everything had to be under the condition that it didn't affect the general situation. If one's personality ruined things, then that was unforgivable. LV Gui had made this mistake. Yang Chendong naturally had to seize this opportunity to properly educate the other party. Coming here with great fanfare to ask for money, those who don't know might think that the embroidered uniform guards are openly asking for bribes. Once this matter spreads, what will those imperial censors and ministers who hate you to the bone do? Is there even a need for Marquis to say anything? Yang Chendong's voice was cold as he stared at LV Gui with a confused expression. This official was too rash. LV Gui's face was pale, and cold sweat poured down his forehead. If things really were as Yang Chendong said, that he'd brought 500 embroidered uniform guards with him and left with 1,000,000 taels of silver from the immortal abode, then the commotion it would cause might even cost him his head. As for the matter of him taking the silver for eunuch Jining, who would believe him if he told them? Not only that, eunuch Jining would probably be the first to make a move on him. His head almost fell off his shoulders as he thought about it. The one who'd saved his life was Yang Chendong. LV Gui didn't blame Yang Chendong in the slightest. On the contrary, he felt some gratitude. You really were too rash. When encountering a problem, you have to think carefully about how to deal with it. You have to plan carefully before you act. Alright, you can go now. I'll arrange for people to send the silver out of the immortal abode in batches. You can arrange for reliable people to wait outside to receive it. Yang Chendong naturally understood the principle of overdoing it, so he waved his hand and made a gesture that said, "You can leave now." Yang Chendong's words had already left LV Gui ashamed. He didn't want to stay here any longer. When he saw Yang Chendong's gesture, he hurriedly nodded and thanked him, then left the immortal abode. Outside the gates, Han Ji and the other embroidered uniform guards were still clamoring. When they saw that LV Gui hadn't come out even after going in for a while, they were even more worried about the commander's safety. They wanted to enter the immortal abode to investigate. Yang Si and Yang Wu, who were in charge of guarding the gates, obviously wouldn't agree to Han Ji's request. They stood in front of the immortal abode with Qiu Vi and the others, blocking everyone's path. Oh! When he saw that someone still dared to block the embroidered uniform guard's path, Han Ji was inwardly delighted. However, he pretended to be angry and turned to the embroidered uniform guards behind him. Brothers, do you see this? There's someone who doesn't give the embroidered uniform guards face and dares to block our path. Tell me, what should we do? Charge in. Arrest anyone who dares block our path and throw them into the imperial prison. The embroidered uniform guards behind him were all roused by Han Ji's words. They all glared at him, unwilling to back down. Chapter 184. Several hundred people were shouting at the entrance of the immortal abode. This scene had long since attracted the attention of many commoners. It was as if they were looking at animals in a zoo. Every one of them had expressions of schadenfreude on their faces. To the commoners, both the embroidered uniform guard and the immortal abode were representatives of privilege. They were both lofty existences. To be able to see them fighting amongst themselves was like a dog-eat-dog situation. The commoners were happy to see it happen. More and more commoners gathered to watch. Gradually, even the servants and spies of the ministers began to appear in the crowd. They all wanted to figure out what was going on. Just as more and more people gathered to watch the commotion, LV Gui walked out of the immortal abode's entrance. When he saw so many commoners gathered around, his heart tightened. The loyal Marquis had been right. Things had already gotten to this point. If they were to take away such a large sum of gold and silver, it was easy to imagine what kind of impact that would have. If it weren't for Yang Chendong's warning, he would have made a grave mistake. He might even lose his head. And all of this was because he had trusted his subordinate Han Ji's words. He'd said he was giving Yang Chendong a show of strength, but in reality, wasn't he also putting his own head on the line? Everyone had this kind of mentality. When something happened, they were always willing to push the blame onto others. It was as if this was the only way to make them seem more intelligent. LV Gui had pushed all the blame onto Han Ji. When he saw how Han Ji was still jumping around, as if he wasn't afraid of making a big fuss, LV Gui couldn't help but feel angry. He quickly stepped forward and slapped Han Ji's face. Pa! A loud slap fell, causing the originally bustling street to quiet down. Bastard, who told you that Walla's spies had infiltrated the Immortal abode? This official went in to investigate, but there was nothing. As the head of the embroidered uniform guard, you actually believed a subordinate's report so easily. You didn't even investigate properly before taking action. Even this official was used by you. This is truly infuriating. From today onwards, Han Ji will be demoted to Jianghu of the embroidered uniform guard. Not only was Lu Gui slapped, but he was also scolded. Even Lu Gui's rank was demoted by more than one rank. Only then did Lu Gui feel much better. He looked around with a sinister gaze and said to the commoners who were watching the show, "What's there to see? Disperse." The dignified commander of the embroidered uniform guard had spoken. Who would dare to stay here? Everyone immediately scattered in all directions, restoring peace and tranquility. LV Gui immediately left with his people. Han Ji, who was stunned by the two slaps, was also dragged away by several of his trusted subordinates. By the window of a private room on the second floor of the Immortal abode, Yang Chendong had seen everything that had happened. His gaze was as sharp as a sword. Young master, now that Han Ji has been demoted, I'm afraid that his hatred for you will grow even greater. In order to avoid any future troubles, why don't? Tiger's mane, who was standing behind him, sensed the faint killing intent coming from Yang Chendong's body and took a small step forward. Yang Chendong didn't refuse. He simply nodded. Tiger mane immediately understood. He also looked down at Han Ji's departing figure. This person is dead for sure. Yang Chendong had taken over all the military forces and defenses in the capital. The first thing he did was open the city gates, allowing the commoners who wanted to leave to leave. The already panicked merchants and commoners now had a chance to leave. In a flash, the population of the capital plummeted, and many industries were emptied. Using this chance, Yang Chendong decisively made his move. With Yang Chendong, Hu Yan, Xiaoyin, Madame Snow, and Madame Xiang working together, more and more industries and properties fell under Yang Chendong's control. In the Immortal abode, the deputy chief of the Bureau of Security and the actual leader of Yang Xie's intelligence department, Yang San, was currently reporting all the information he had gathered to Yang Chendong. Young master, everything is as you imagined. The city gates are open, but the majority of those leaving are still merchants. The commoners only make up 2 or 3 out of 10. It seems that the commoners still have confidence in the imperial court. In addition, according to your previous orders, we've investigated and found that there truly are some merchants in the city who are profiting from the country's calamity. These people are mainly grain and salt merchants. They are wantonly raising the prices of grain and salt, throwing the normal order of the capital into disarray. We've recorded all the names of these people. It's all on this list. As Yang San spoke, he respectfully handed a list of names to his superior, Tiger's Mane, and then transferred it to Yang Chendong. Casually glancing at the list, he saw that there were 50 to 60 names. Yang Chendong lightly shook his head. These merchants have no sovereign or country, and only have profit in their eyes. They should be arrested. How about this? Immediately report this to eunuch Ji Ning and have him report this to His Majesty. After that, mobilize the embroidered uniform guard and the Eastern Depot to arrest these merchants for the crime of colluding with the enemy. Yang Chendong's voice was firm and decisive. There was nothing wrong with merchants seeking wealth, but if they wanted to profit from war and the country's calamity, then sorry, these merchants needed to be properly punished. Presumably, arresting these people would serve as a warning to the enemy. With this sort of example, the other merchants would have to think twice before doing anything out of line. As for how these merchants would be dealt with after being arrested, the embroidered uniform guard would probably know what to do. At most, they would be using money to buy their lives. As for those merchants who only cared about wealth and not the country, sorry, but killing a few of them as an example wasn't out of the question. After dealing with these merchants, Yang San continued to report. Young Master, Commander Leng Song has brought 3 companies of Leng Feng to the outskirts of the capital. They only need your order to enter the city. He's asking for young master's instructions on when and how to enter the city. In Yang Xie's new army, there were currently 20 companies and 5 battalions in the army, and 20 companies and 5 battalions in the navy. However, Yang Chendong didn't integrate these armies, and they were still divided into battalions. But even so, 2 commanders were appointed, and they were Leng Song of the army and Gao Xiong of the navy. This time, after learning that the young master was going to fight with Tile in the capital, they had to properly deal with the other party's spirit. In Crimson City, the battalion commanders of the Yang faction's new army were all busy fighting for this opportunity to perform well in front of the 6th young master. With the various battalion commanders fighting over this opportunity, Gao Xiong and Leng Song couldn't come to a decision. In the end, Leng Song, as the commander, brought 3 companies of soldiers over. After all, this battle was under the command of the 6th young master, and to be able to learn from the 6th young master was Leng Song's wish. As the only commander of the army and the highest-ranking officer other than Yang Chendong, if he were to personally lead the soldiers, the other battalion commanders naturally lost their chance. Since they couldn't become the commander, the other battalion commanders set their sights on the position of company commander. For a moment, the battalion commanders were willing to lower themselves by a rank and come to the capital as company commanders, listening to the orders of the 6th young master. For this matter, Leng Song and Gao Xiong had a headache for a long time. In the end, after some coordination, they came up with a result that satisfied all parties. Leng Song would be the commander of the 1st Battalion and the commander of the 2nd Company. Teng Shan, who was originally the commander of the 3rd Battalion, would be the commander of the 3rd Company. The commander of the 4th Battalion, Wu Sheng, would be the commander of the 4th Company. If one added on the 2nd Battalion commander, Xiao Feng, who had arrived in the capital early, then there would be 1 commander and 3 battalion commanders, forming 4 elite companies. At this time, Yang Chendong was holding a list in his hands. On it was a detailed list of the 300 men of the 3 companies. There were many names on this list that he could name. These were the first batch of cold front soldiers that he had personally trained, and 4th Battalion Commander Wu Sheng had also been trained by him. But when he graduated, there were too few officer positions, so he had been assigned the position of squad leader. He hadn't expected that after the training and outstanding performance in Crimson City, he would be promoted to battalion commander so quickly. Okay, arrange for them to enter the city in the afternoon. That's right, have them all wear camouflage uniforms and enter the city. Since they're called mercenaries, they naturally have to be different from other soldiers. Yang San will be in charge of this matter. Tiger's man will arrange for people to find a large courtyard in the city and have Leng Song and the others settle down there. Remember, without the permission of the young master, no one is allowed to approach that place. If any embroidered uniform guard or Eastern faction guard spies want to understand the situation, see some blood, but it's best if they don't kill anyone. The cold front had been single-handedly established by Yang Chendong, and he had spent a great deal of effort on it. Now that he finally had a chance to shine his sword, he naturally couldn't be careless. As the orders were passed down, the capital began to bustle with activity. Many embroidered uniform guards wearing flying fish robes suddenly appeared outside the shops that were operating. Upon their appearance, they immediately took away the shopkeepers and sealed up the shops. Their appearance was so sudden that many of the shopkeepers had cold chains around their necks before they could even understand what was going on. For a moment, one could see embroidered uniform guards on the streets, as well as the fat shopkeepers in cotton robes who had been captured by them. The sealing of shops and the capture of shopkeepers had caused wave after wave of unrest. This was especially the case since the majority of the shops that had been sealed were those that sold rice and salt. These were the most basic necessities of the common people, and this made them even more anxious. Chaos could erupt at any moment. Right at this moment, the sound of firecrackers could be heard from the streets. When the curious citizens came over, they realized that some new grain shops and salt shops had opened for business. The excellent location, the spacious and bright business environment, and the sight of mountains of rice and grains, as well as the unified Yang signboard, instantly calmed the anxious hearts of the citizens. Chapter 185. This was especially so when they heard that the prices of rice and salt were still the same as 10 days ago. There was no sign that the prices would increase because of the impending war. This made the common folk beam with joy and rush forward to buy. This also played a very positive role in stabilizing the morale of the people in the capital. Near the Miaoying Temple, also known as the White Tower Temple, in the inner city, in a shop that occupied an area of 500 square meters, a girl dressed in a pink suit was smiling as she looked at the people coming and going in the shop. She watched as the customers came and left happily. This woman was Yang Chendong's wife, Yuan. Dressed in a pink suit, she looked extremely capable and experienced. At this moment, she was supervising everything that happened in the shop as the lady boss, as well as all the transactions. The Miaoying Temple was near the Hu estate. Yuan had chosen this place to exercise her sovereignty so that she could better see the smiles on the faces of her former neighbors. Reality did not disappoint her. The cheap and high-quality food indeed made the faces of the commoners who entered here brimming with satisfied smiles. "First Madam, Marquis has ordered for you to hurry to the Yongding Gate. There's a show to watch." Just as she was sitting on a chair, sipping tea and looking at everything in front of her with satisfaction, Sun Chuang came to Yuan's side and reported in a low voice after exchanging a few words with Ling Feng, who was delivering the news. "There's a show to watch. Prepare the sedan." Yuan originally wanted to stay a little longer and see if she could meet some acquaintances. However, when she heard that there was going to be a show to watch, how could she calm down? She immediately got up in a hurry, causing her maidservant, Shao Qing, to grumble, "Miss, slow down. Walk slower." The same scene happened to Qiao Yin, Madame Shui, and Madame Xiang, who were patrolling the various shops in the city. They had all received news that there was a show to watch at the Yongding Gate, and that their husband was waiting for them there. Thus, they all came in their sedan. On the tower of the Yongding Gate, Yang Chendong, dressed in green, was standing there. Beside him were Tao Jin, Sun Chuang, and the other commanders of the warden's office. The five of them stood there and looked into the distance. Unfortunately, their eyesight was limited, and what they could see was very limited. Seeing nothing, the five of them looked at each other and then shook their heads. They really didn't know why the loyal Marquis had called them here. Compared to what the five of them were looking at with their eyes, Yang Chendong was holding a pair of military binoculars in his hand. From time to time, he would raise the binoculars and look into the distance. Then, a faint smile would appear in his eyes. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of high heels stepping on the ground could be heard from the stairs leading to the city tower. It was crisp and pleasant to the ears. Hearing the voice, Yang Chendong didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Apart from his four wives, there was no one else in the world who would wear something as avant-garde as high-heeled leather shoes. Sure enough, Hu Yan took the lead, followed by Qiao Yin, followed by Madame Xue and Madame Xiang. The four women wore different women's suits of different colors and arrived at the top of the tower of the Yongding Gate. As soon as the four women appeared, it was really like 100 flowers blooming, giving a great visual impact to the men. The delicate women's suits made the four women's originally plump figures look more explosive. Under the knee-length miniskirts were white skin and slender and healthy legs, which made the men's hearts beat faster. With the contrast of the high heels, it made their figures look even more tall and beautiful. As soon as the four women appeared, they attracted everyone's attention. Ahem. Tiger's Mane, who was standing aside, noticed that Sun Pa and the other four people's eyes were fixed on Hu Yan and the other three women. He immediately coughed a few times. These coughs also reminded Sun Pa and the other four people and instantly pulled their thoughts back to reality. Only then did they realize that it was really indecent to stare at the wives of the loyal marquis with such eyes. Immediately, they blushed and turned their heads away. Lu Lang. Hu Yan and the other women simply ignored the gazes of others looking at them. Although their hearts were beating very fast at this time, they had gradually become accustomed to the feeling of being stared at and were able to quickly calm their emotions. The four women happily came to Yang Chendong and surrounded him, and then greeted him. Of course, the most common question of the women was to ask what was there to see here. Don't worry, they will be here soon. Come on, give each of the four wives a telescope. Yang Chendong looked at the four women and smiled. With a gentle wave of his hand, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei each held 2 binoculars and handed them to Hu Yan and the other 3 women. The 4 women were no stranger to binoculars. They had seen it when they were in Yang village. They had also sighed at the magic of this thing and their husband's cleverness. At this time, after taking the binoculars in their hands, they looked in the direction Yang Chendong pointed. With this look, a touch of olive green appeared in the binoculars. From a distance, it looked like a straight pine tree. The only difference was that this pine tree was moving forward slowly. What is that? How can it move? Madame Snow was like a child who had discovered a new world. She shouted and shouted, expressing her curiosity. Although Hu Yan and Lady Xiang did not say anything, they put down the binoculars and looked at Yang Chendong with expectant eyes, revealing the surprise in their hearts. Only Qiao Yin, who had been to Qian City and even witnessed Yang Chendong training Ling Feng, looked at the 6th young master with a kind of gentle sunshine. She knew very well that these moving pine trees must be the trained elite force, Ling Feng, and their appearance must have been ordered by Lu Lang. What is it? What can move? At this time, Sun Tong and the other 4 looked at the girls with puzzled and confused eyes, and finally fixed their eyes on Yang Chendong. Seeing everyone's confusion, Yang Chendong first took off the binoculars hanging on his body and then handed it to Tiger's Mane, who was standing beside him. He did not say anything, but this servant, who had been following him since childhood, understood the young master's meaning. He took the binoculars and handed it to the puzzled Sun Tong. With curiosity and even more confusion, Sun Tong took the nightmare domain and then followed Yang Chendong and the girls, put the binoculars in front of his eyes. After looking at it, he could not help but scream. Perhaps the thing in front of him was too shocking, causing Sun Tong to put down his hands in surprise. Fortunately, the binoculars' long rope was hanging around his neck. Otherwise, such a valuable thing would have fallen to the ground after losing the binoculars. Sun Tong's shout made the other 4 commanders of the warden's office even more curious. They all surrounded him and asked what was going on. What exactly did he see that caused him to be so shocked and at a loss? Sun Tong did not know how to describe it or how to answer, so he decided to tell his colleagues the truth. He took off the binoculars and handed it to Tao Jin. Tao Jin also imitated Sun Tong and raised the binoculars in front of her eyes. Soon, she also imitated Sun Tong and screamed. Her face was numb and she looked frightened. Ignoring the reactions of the commanders, Yang Chendong's eyes fell on Hu Yan and the girls, and said with a smile, "This is the show that Lu Lang wanted you to see. And that is not something, it is an army, a mercenary army." Mercenary army? Hu Yan and the girls were confused. They had seen mercenaries before. Weren't the 100 Ling Feng led by Xiao Feng mercenaries? Moreover, these people were very polite to the girls, but it seemed that they were not the same. He nodded heavily. Lu Lang would not lie to you. It's just that the military uniforms of these mercenaries are different from the mercenaries you have seen before. Yang Chendong saw the doubts in the girls' eyes. Without waiting for them to ask, he took the initiative to answer. Yang Chendong's explanation made Hu Yan and the other girls nod their heads thoughtfully. While they were talking, this olive-green army of 300 people was rapidly approaching the Yongding city gate. The Great Ming City's city guards, who had received the order before, didn't stop the foreign army when they saw them approaching from afar. They just looked at this army that was completely different from theirs with vigilance. They wore light green camouflage uniforms and camouflage hats. They wore a pair of shiny black military high-waisted leather shoes, held a cold black Type 95 pistol in their hands, and carried a large backpack on their backs. There were blankets for them to sleep on, face boxes for them to wash their faces, toiletries, and some necessities for their daily lives. The leader of the group was Ling Song, the army commander of the Yang faction's new army. He straightened his body and looked forward with bright eyes. His steps were vigorous, and there was a sense of rhythm to them. Behind him, the 300 men were in a line of 4. There were a total of 75 Ling Feng soldiers marching forward in an orderly manner. Every 25 Ling Feng soldiers would be led by an officer. Unlike ordinary soldiers, they were all carrying exquisite black pistols. Under the protection of the holsters, the pistols were faintly discernible. When they could see the walls of the capital with their naked eyes, the 300 Ling Feng soldiers became highly nervous and excited. Not for anything else, but they would soon be able to see their absolute commander, the founder of this army, Yang Chendong. Everyone seemed very nervous. When the army was 100 meters away from the Yongding city gate, Ling Song, who was leading the army, had a solemn and dignified expression. "Second company, get ready. It's time to show our spirit. Everyone, listen to my orders. Comrades, as close as brothers. Get ready to sing. Comrades, as close as brothers. I hope you can call us together. You come from the border, he comes from the interior. We are all children of the country." The neat and loud singing of the second company suddenly sounded. The first to be shocked were the Great Ming soldiers guarding the city gate. Chapter 186. When they suddenly heard the neat and heroic singing, they were not shocked, but frightened. Some of the more cowardly ones even threw the spears in their hands to the ground. The more courageous ones also raised their spears and tightly protected their bodies. It was as if they were on the battlefield and were ready to fight at any time. As the song rang out, Sun Pa and the others on the city gate tower, who had been looking uneasy, were startled awake. They were still exclaiming about the magic and power of the telescope. What kind of existence was it to be able to zoom in so close to something so far away? While they were still puzzled and confused, they heard the earth-shattering singing. The 5 of them were startled and woke up from their doubts. The next thing he did was to look down at the 300 mercenaries dressed in strange clothes who were entering the city. "Third company, listen up. Soldiers who have been through tough times, get ready to sing." Teng Shan's shout suddenly rang out. "A firm company, a firm soldier, a firm mind red, a firm bullet with eyes, a firm bayonet stained red with blood, a charge like a gale, a firm iron wall, a firm company with many heroes, a firm soldier is all red." Immediately, a loud voice rang out, echoing the loud and clear singing of the second company in front of them. "Wow! This song is so shocking. Just listening to it makes one's blood boil. Who composed this song? From a professional point of view, Lady Xiang and Lady Shui soon came up with a question. Then, they looked at Lu Lang, who belonged to them, with deep meaning. During this period of contact with Yang Chendong, the two women had listened to many new songs and songs. Over time, they had become immune to these beautiful songs. At this moment, when they heard such a vigorous new military song, they naturally thought it was composed by Lu Lang. Yang Chendong did not give any answer to this. He just smiled and raised his right hand, greeting the 300 Lingfeng who were passing through the city gate. People who did not know saw this and thought it was just a warm greeting, but the Lingfeng marching under the city gate tower knew that this was the 6th young master welcoming them. These soldiers are so energetic. Yes. They march in unison. One look and you can tell that they are an elite army. As expected of a mercenary army. Just by looking at their momentum, the Great Ming army can't compare to them. I just don't know how they trained. On the city gate tower, Sun Tong and the other commanders were sighing and envious. At the same time, they had a certain degree of confidence in defending the capital. Under the city gate tower, the company commander of the 4th Company, Wu Sheng, took the lead to sing the military song, "Unity is Strength." The entire army smoothly entered the city. Under the leadership of Xiao Feng and the other Lingfeng, they strode toward their own small courtyard in the city. Inform all the soldiers in the city not to disturb these mercenaries. Even spying on them. They have bad tempers. If they cause trouble, they will bear the consequences. Yang Chendong looked at the team going away in his eyes, then he ordered Sun Pe and the other 4 people. Rest assured, Marquis. The soldiers of the warden's office will be very obedient. Sun Tong took a step forward and cautiously said, however, we can't control the people from the Eastern faction and the embroidered uniform guard. If we can't control them, then don't. Just tell them the news. If anyone is blind enough to go up and lose their life, then it has nothing to do with us. Yang Chendong's lips curled up slightly as a strong sense of confidence spread through his body. Although the embroidered uniform guard and the Eastern faction were very powerful existences in the Great Ming Dynasty, they were still nothing in front of the true Lingfeng. They were not qualified to be his opponents. The news of the 300 mercenaries entering the city quickly reached the palace and Emperor Zhu Qiyu's ears. They're all here? Are you sure it's 300 people? Zhu Qiyu asked with a trace of suspicion after hearing the news. It was no wonder that he cared so much about the number of people. Every person that appeared represented 20,000 taels of silver. Just thinking about it made one's heart ache. Even though they had exchanged some imperial properties for money, they had still taken out 5 million taels of silver. To the Great Ming Dynasty, 5 million taels of silver was almost 2 years of tax revenue. How could Zhu Qiyu's heart not ache? As the emperor's personal attendant, Jining naturally understood the logic behind this. When she heard the emperor ask about the number of mercenaries, she immediately replied, "Your Majesty, don't worry. We have checked the number of mercenaries one by one. 303. This is 3 more than the original request." Oh. Then they won't ask us for more money, right? Who would have thought that Dai Zong, Zhu Qiyu's first reaction would be to ask for more money? Ji Ning was very helpless about this. She could only say in an uncertain tone, that shouldn't be the case. After all, we've already given them a few million taels of silver. They shouldn't be short of 60,000 taels of silver. It's good that they won't ask for more money. Zhu Qiyu nodded as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He had only become the emperor for a short while, but he had already experienced so many things. Only leaving and not entering, this seemed to be getting further and further away from his path of becoming a wise emperor. He had no choice but to be more careful. Ji Ning stood at the side. She was still waiting for Zhu Qiyu's instructions. Unexpectedly, there was no more movement from him. For a moment, she had so many things to say in her heart. She couldn't help but say carefully, "Your Majesty, they're here, but we don't know how strong they are. After all, there are only 300 people. Can they defeat the powerful Walla army with just them? This subject is worried about this." "Right, right." After Jin Ying's reminder, Zhu Qiyu couldn't help but nod. After all, there were only 300 people. Even if they added the 100 from before, there were only 400 people. Could they really keep the Walla army out of the capital with just this? Even the emperor, Zhu Qiyu, had some doubts about this. "Beloved subject, in your opinion, what should we do?" This subject isn't sure. But there's nothing wrong with probing. It's just that the loyal Marquis has given strict orders that no one is allowed to disturb these mercenaries. He says that they have bad tempers and that if they rashly spy on them, someone might die. Thus, this subject doesn't know what to do, Jining said as she turned to look at Zhu Qiyu. Jining truly didn't have much trust in these mercenaries, so she wanted to send someone to probe them. But she was also worried that this would infuriate Yang Chendong and cause him to be in an awkward position. Thus, she had decided to go with Zhu Qiyu's decree. Although he hadn't been emperor for very long, Zhu Qiyu had always been a smart man. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become Emperor Jing. After hearing Jin Ying's words, how could he not know what she was thinking? There were some things that needed to be probed to find out. Otherwise, if he really did find a bunch of mediocre people, wouldn't it ruin his important task of guarding the capital? Thus, Zhu Qiyu only needed to think for a moment before saying to Jining, "We also have this concern. Since that's the case, why don't we go and probe them? Presumably, even if something happens, we can say that we didn't know anything. Even the loyal Marquis can't do anything about it." Jining had been waiting for this exact sentence. She had been waiting for this imperial decree. Since even Zhu Qiyu had said this, she naturally felt relieved and said, "Yes, this subject knows what to do." After obtaining the emperor's permission, Jining immediately summoned the commander of the embroidered uniform guard, Lu Gui, and gave him instructions on sending someone to probe the strength of the mercenaries. LV Gui had just taken back the 1 million taels of silver and received a new order. When he heard that he was going against Yang Chendong again, he didn't know why, but there was a trace of fear in his heart. Previously, Lu Gui had only thought that Yang Chendong had been lucky enough to reach his current position at such a young age. However, after meeting him in the Immortal abode that morning, the other party's aura, which was far beyond his age, made him feel uneasy. Yang Chendong had already said that the mercenaries had bad tempers and were not to be provoked. However, Jin Ying's arrival with an imperial decree put him in a difficult position. Should he send someone to probe? He was worried that he would anger Yang Chendong. The powerful aura that had oppressed him in the morning had yet to completely dissipate. Should he not go? This was the emperor's decree, and also eunuch Jin's orders. Even if he had twice as much courage, he wouldn't dare disobey. I still have to go. But who should I send? Lu Gui's mind began to fill with names and figures. Soon, Han Ji's name appeared in his mind. Han Ji had offended Yang Chendong. As Shengguan Lu Gui, he was well aware of this. Today, he had been demoted because of a mistake and demoted to a Jianghu. If he were still Commander Qianshi, it wouldn't be appropriate for him to probe. However, a Jianghu wasn't an issue. "Men, bring Jianghu Han here. I have something to discuss with him." Now that he had made up his mind, his tone was filled with confidence. Han Ji. From the moment he married his sister to Wang Go, he had already sworn an irreconcilable oath with Yang Chendong. From that moment on, he had already had one foot in the gates of hell. The reason he hadn't killed Han Ji before was because of his status. If a Commander Qianshi of the embroidered uniform guard, a dignified fourth-rank official, was suddenly killed, it would definitely cause a huge uproar. This wouldn't benefit Yang Chendong at all. It was better to keep him alive for now and wait for the right opportunity to make a move. However, this morning, Han Ji had actually instigated Lu Gui to make trouble for the immortal abode. Just this alone made it clear that he couldn't be allowed to live. After Tiger's man received the order, he handed this mission to the captain of the Ghost Shadow Sniper Squad, Baizhua. This kind of invisible killing was the Ghost Shadow Sniper Squad's specialty. After receiving the mission, Baizhua began to look forward to the arrival of night. Chapter 187. Before the sky was completely dark, the people who were watching Han Ji sent back a message, saying that he had gone to the commander of the embroidered uniform guards, Lu Gui. In less than the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, he came out again, and then brought 10 embroidered uniform guards with him to an inconspicuous restaurant nearby to drink. Han Ji's abnormal behavior was quickly made suspicious by Baizhua after he learned about it. He had just been demoted during the day, so he should be in a bad mood. How could he have the leisure to drink? Even if he was going to drink, he shouldn't have brought 10 skilled brothers with him. There was only one explanation for such behavior, and that was that he had received some kind of mission. Not knowing what Han Ji would do, Baizhua simply ordered to keep an eye on him. At the same time, all the brothers had to maintain 100% vigilance. They just had to eat some dry food in their respective monitoring positions. If there was an accident because of anyone's carelessness, then they would be expelled from the Ghost Sniper team. With the strict order, the 20 members entered a state of battle preparation. Even when it was time to eat, the snipers and observers ate separately, keeping an eye on Han Ji. He was completely monitored, but Han Ji didn't realize it. He was still eating meat and drinking with his brothers in the restaurant. "Brothers," the commander said, that today's mission is extremely important. This Qianxia also took into account the good relationship between us, so I brought you out to pick up merits. So tonight we can drink, but no one is allowed to drink too much, understand? Han Ji said with a face full of pride. He even called himself Qianxia. In fact, this was LV Gui's promise to him. LV Gui said that tonight's mission was to test these new mercenaries and see what kind of level they had. If they were heavily guarded and had strong combat power, then they shouldn't provoke them. But if they were just donkey dung eggs on the surface, then they should teach them a lesson, which was equivalent to making a great contribution. When the time came, he would definitely report to the emperor. At that time, it would be easy to restore his identity as Qianxia. Once he entered the eyes of the new emperor, his future would be bright. It was even possible that he would be promoted and become a fellow embroidered uniform guard. Making such a heavy promise was just to make Han Ji do his best in his work. Regarding this, Han Ji was completely unaware. He only thought that the emperor was suspicious of these mercenaries. In his heart, he thought that as long as he could prove that these mercenaries were incompetent, he would be able to heavily damage Yang Chendong's reputation. At that time, he would definitely make this loyal marquis kneel at his feet and apologize. With such a thought, he was determined to succeed in tonight's operation. He had already thought it through. He would use the knockout incense to subdue these mercenaries. This was also the most common method used by the Imperial Secret Service. If they were caught off guard, no matter what kind of expert they would eventually be knocked to the ground. At that time, wouldn't they be at his mercy? Han Ji described a beautiful future, and the 10 brothers all showed expressions of gratitude, thanking him. It was as if they had already made a great contribution. They drank for more than 4 hours until the sky was completely dark and the curfew bell had rung. Only then did Han Ji leave the tavern with his brothers and rush toward the courtyard where the mercenaries lived. This scene was clearly seen by the Phantom Sniper Squad. When they saw the direction this group of people was heading, Baizhua quickly understood the other party's intentions. He immediately sent someone to report the situation to the 6th young master. After all, the other party's target was Leng Song and the others. Whether they wanted to continue the assassination mission or not, they still needed to obtain Yang Chendong's approval. Under surveillance, Han Ji and his 10 trusted subordinates had already arrived at a street away from Ling Feng's courtyard. They stopped here and then each of them looked for a safe place to hide. As experts of the Imperial Secret Service, their hiding skills were naturally not bad. In addition to the cover of the night, if it wasn't for the fact that they were constantly watching them, it would be difficult for Bai Zhou and the others to discover them without the help of the night vision device. Han Ji's group of 11 hid and began to wait. They were waiting for the arrival of night, the moment when a person's body was at its most exhausted. They believed that these mercenaries, who were constantly on the move, would make a mistake even if they arranged for someone to be on night watch. That would be the best time for them to make their move. They didn't ask for too much. As long as they could kill 2 mercenaries, it would be enough to prove that their mission was a success, and that these people's strength was only so. Immortal abode. It was the largest bedroom in the rear courtyard. When it was built, it was originally reserved for Yang Chendong to rest in. Even though every inch of land here was worth its weight in gold, and even though the 6th young master didn't often come here to rest, the room had always been reserved. This was a sign of everyone's gratitude and respect for him. Since he had taken over the city's military, it was naturally inappropriate for him to rest in the Yang manor. For the past few days, this place had become Yang Chendong's resting place. At night, Hu Yan and the other 3 girls would accompany him here. For the past few days, they would chat and have a good time. In the room, Yang Chendong was telling stories to the 4 girls and making them happy. Suddenly, he heard Tiger's Mane's voice from outside the door. "Young master, Bai Zhou has sent news." "Wait a minute." Yang Chendong shouted to the outside, then put on a robe. After giving the girls a look to wait for a moment, he walked out of the bedroom and saw Tiger's Mane and an observer from the Ghost Shadow Sniper team outside the door. As soon as the observer saw Yang Chendong come out, he half knelt on the ground and showed great respect. "6th young master, when our captain followed Han Ji, he found that he took 10 men and rushed to the courtyard where Commander Leng Song was resting. The captain asked for instructions on what to do next." "Oh. There's such a thing." Yang Chendong's eyes narrowed slightly after hearing this, then he quickly smiled and said, "If the King of Hell wants you to die at midnight, who dares to keep you alive until dawn? Since he wants to die so much, we'll fulfill his wish. Tell your captain not to alert the enemy. It's a good opportunity to see how vigilant Leng Song is. Also, no matter what the result is, there's no need to keep any of these people alive. Kill them all and hand them over to the security bureau. Let them send these bodies to the genie guard's office as a warning." Since he said before that the mercenaries had bad tempers, whoever provoked them would be unlucky, and if there were still people who wanted to try, then there was no need to be polite. It just so happened that Han Ji was also killed, so it saved him some trouble in cleaning up the aftermath. In the dark, the security bureau's people escorted the observer back to Bai Zhuo's place. After receiving the 6th young master's order, the Ghost Shadow Sniper team quietly stayed in the dark, as if they were one with the night. The cold wind blew, and the drums of the 3rd night watch were beaten. The whole street was silent. A few black shadows covered each other on the street and began to move. The Genie Guard was an important military force that the emperors relied on. It was indeed good. At least, the way they moved forward alternately was very desirable. They always maintained an attacking formation and did not forget to defend. It had to be said that they spent a lot of effort in training. In just a few moments, the 8 figures disappeared into the depths of the street, giving people the feeling that they had never appeared. But in the dark corner, 2 groups of people were waiting for their arrival. Han Ji was very careful not to make a move directly. Instead, he stopped there with 2 trusted aides. This way, if there was good news, he could be the first to know. Of course, if the situation was not good, he could also withdraw at the first moment. Perhaps this was the advantage of being an official. The danger was always left to the subordinates, and most of the credit would fall into his hands. Similarly, Bai Zhua and the other 21 people were waiting. The difference was that they had used this time to surround Han Ji, who was hiding in the corner, in a fan-shaped formation. That seemingly inconspicuous corner had long become the target of public criticism. This kind of fan-shaped circle could guarantee that once Han Ji wanted to leave, no matter which direction he left in, he would at least be facing the muzzles of the two snipers. It was really difficult to escape even if he had wings. Han Ji, who was unaware of this, was still waiting for the good news. He was very confident in his heart. Not to mention that the 8 men were very skilled, they were also equipped with strong bows and crossbows. Even in the dark, they could guarantee that they could kill the target within 70 steps. Having such strong bows was where Han Ji's confidence came from. He closed his eyes and leaned against the corner, even showing a victorious smile on his face. He seemed to have seen the scene of success and the scene of him receiving the reward for the mission. In the courtyard across the street. This courtyard was originally the residence of a prince. Later, because it was sealed outside, it became empty and became the property of the imperial family. This time, when they were discussing with the Ministry of Revenue, Yang Chendong's cousin, Yang Fu, felt that the environment here was good. Most importantly, the territory was big enough, so he took over this courtyard and made it the temporary resting place of the cold front soldiers. According to the rules, when they entered the courtyard, Commander Leng Song ordered people to do a thorough search. Even though this was the place that the 6th young master had arranged for them, there was no harm in being careful. Yang Chendong often said that it was better to rely on oneself than on others. It was impossible for people not to make mistakes, but a cautious attitude could completely reduce the chances of making mistakes. After this lesson, no matter where the cold front soldiers were, no matter how tired they were, they never relaxed their search of the resting place. When they were attacking the central part of Ryukyu Island, they even found 2 hidden enemy soldiers near the resting place. They originally wanted to set fire to the place while the cold front soldiers were asleep, but in the end, they were caught by the always cautious new army. Since then, every time they went to a place, a strict search of the surroundings became an iron rule. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.